The porch light was still on when Mark Hanlon disappeared from the oil town of Williston, North Dakota, population 12,113. The night of December 18, 1981, brought a blizzard that dumped more than 10 inches of blinding white snow across Williams County. At 8:47 p.m., Mark's wife, Elaine Hanlon, stood in the kitchen doorway, watching as her husband braved the wind across the narrow yard toward his dark green pickup. Mark carried only a still steaming thermos and a few crumpled papers he had hastily stuffed into his coat pocket. Elaine watched Mark's figure fade into the swirling snow, the dark brown coat the last splash of color before the darkness swallowed him whole. What happened in the hours that followed would haunt Williston for nearly 3 decades. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Williston, North Dakota, in the winter of 1981, was buried under thick snow and cutting winds sweeping across the northern plains. The normally quiet small town now huddled even more tightly against the harsh December cold. In the sparse outskirts, the Hanlon family lived in a modest wooden house located nearly half a mile from the main road. Mark Hanlon, 37 years old, a construction worker employed by a local company, was known as hard-working, reserved, and rarely straying from his familiar routines. He lived with his wife, Elaine, and their 3 young children. The marriage between Mark and Elaine wasn't marked by dramatic fights, but many who knew them noticed a quiet tension that had been building for months. Small disagreements over money management, Mark coming home late without explanation, and sometimes prolonged silences between the couple, even during dinner. December 18, 1981, unfolded like any other day. Mark worked at the construction site until near dusk, stopped at the gas station for snacks and cigarettes, then returned home as the snow began falling harder. The family dinner passed in near silence, with only the sound of wind battering the windows louder than any conversation. After 8 p.m., Mark walked around the yard to check some tools stacked near the shed, then came back inside looking deep in thought. Around 8:45, Mark put on his thick brown coat, pulled on a wool cap, and told Elaine he was heading to the auxiliary farm to the west to check the livestock pens before the weather worsened. No one in the family questioned it. It was a routine he followed every time winter arrived. Mark stepped outside, closed the door, and the taillights of his pickup were the last thing Elaine saw before they vanished into the thick white curtain of snow. Time dragged as the night deepened. By nearly midnight, Mark still hadn't returned. Elaine made coffee, paced the living room, and looked out the window repeatedly, but the yard offered only darkness. At 1 a.m., she began to feel uneasy. The snow grew heavier, the wind pounded the roof, and she knew that if Mark had run into trouble on the road, getting back on his own would be nearly impossible. Around 1:40 a.m., Elaine tried calling the auxiliary farm, but no one answered. An hour later, worry turned into clear fear. There was no trace, no sound of an engine, no sign of Mark since he had left the house. At 2:19 a.m. on December 19, 1981, with Mark still missing and the blizzard outside showing no signs of letting up, Elaine picked up the phone and called the police to report her husband missing. That call was immediately routed to the Williams County Emergency Dispatch Center, where the night shift consisted of only 2 dispatchers struggling to handle a string of weather-related distress calls amid heavy interference, flickering lines, and frequent interruptions. Once the connection was established, the dispatcher quickly recorded the initial information, the caller's identity, the last time the missing person was seen, weather conditions, and the level of concern expressed by the caller. Under 1981 protocols, any adult reported missing in severe weather was automatically classified as elevated concern, especially when the individual left home at night in a personal vehicle without any communication equipment beyond a mobile radio that Mark rarely used. The dispatcher began filling out the missing person report form, including identifying information, clothing description, vehicle type, intended direction of travel, and risk factors such as weather or terrain. The case was coded as Missing Person Tier 2, allowing night patrol units to receive a dispatch order within 10 minutes. After completing the initial phone intake, dispatch immediately contacted the patrol unit closest to the Hanlon residence. A Williams County Sheriff's Patrol vehicle, on duty south of Williston, was redirected to the Hanlon address with a clear notation. Subject left home during blizzard, past expected return time, risk of prolonged cold exposure. The urgency assessment at the time did not yet rely on modern criteria like the golden hours, but it followed the sheriff's basic principle: when someone vanishes during a nighttime blizzard, exhaustion, getting lost, or a minor accident leading to hypothermia were always considered primary risks. The deputy on night shift logged the initial details in the patrol logbook, noted the time the order was received, and prepared appropriate equipment, including high-powered spotlights, two-way radio, first aid kit, and snow shovel, in case road clearing was needed. As the patrol vehicle left the station, dispatch simultaneously contacted the night shift commander to request approval for forming an initial response team. At that time, procedures were still simplified. The response team wasn't a specialized unit, but rather a group of 3-4 nearby personnel who could assist with preliminary sweeps and report to superiors if anything unusual was found. After about 5 minutes of review and quick checking of the missing person criteria in effect, the night commander approved the formation of an initial response team and ordered an additional patrol unit from the west side of town to move toward the route Mark was likely to have taken. All decisions and routes were manually recorded in the dispatch log, from the time orders were issued, the identities of participating units, to the specific travel directions of each patrol vehicle under adverse weather conditions. While units were deploying, the dispatch center continued to maintain contact with Elaine to gather additional background details about Mark, including his mental state that day, his familiarity with the western area, and whether he had taken any support items when he left, all of which were immediately added to the missing person file to assist with initial verification. Near 3 a.m., the first patrol vehicle pulled up in front of the Hanlon house as the blizzard continued to lash the porch. Visibility reduced to just a few yards, while the interior lights still blazed, showing the entire house was awake and waiting. Elaine opened the door with visible tension on her face. The 3 children had been sent to bed, but the atmosphere inside made it clear no one was truly at ease. The deputy began by asking Elaine to recount the full sequence from when Mark was still inside until he left. The most precise time was established as approximately 8:45 p.m. According to the kitchen wall clock, Elaine remembered clearly because she was washing dishes and saw Mark putting on his heavy coat. Mark's clothing was described as a brown coat, black wool cap, faded blue jeans, and the work boots he usually wore on cold nights. These details were recorded in the deputy's notebook. In 1981, there were no electronic forms, so all data had to be handwritten in full. The deputy requested to observe the entryway and living room area where Mark had stood before stepping outside. The house showed no signs of disturbance. The dining table still had 2 empty bowls. Elaine's coat hung in its usual place. The floor was dry, and there were no broken items or indications of an argument. The deputy noted this in the report and informed dispatch that the home environment showed no unusual behavior prior to the subject's departure. From Elaine's statement, the deputy established a preliminary timeline: 6 p.m., Mark returned from work; 7 p.m. family dinner; around 8 p.m., Mark went outside to the yard for a few minutes; 8:45 p.m., Mark put on his coat, took a flashlight, and left the house, stating he was going to check the western livestock pens. From that point until nearly 3 a.m., there had been no calls or signals from him. The deputy asked further about the vehicle Mark was driving. Elaine stated that Mark took the dark green Ford F-150 pickup, the only vehicle he used for work and daily travel, and the only one suitable for the dirt road to the auxiliary farm. The deputy recorded the license plate information, the vehicle's condition before departure as described by Elaine, and confirmed that Mark did not take the two-way radio. He usually left it in the garage because he rarely used it. This information was added to the missing person file so field search units would have accurate details matching the moment Mark disappeared. After recording all information, the deputy asked Elaine to review and confirm each detail to ensure no errors in the initial foundational data of the missing person file. The on-site information collection at the Hanlon residence concluded after about 30 minutes and was immediately treated as the guiding basis for the sheriff's entire initial search operation during that brutal blizzard night. Leaving the still-lit house, the deputy began Level 1 reconnaissance within a 1-mile radius of the residential area where Mark could have passed immediately after leaving home. The blizzard maintained strong intensity, visibility reduced to less than 3 yards, forcing the deputy to use high-powered spotlights and move slowly to avoid missing any unusual signs. The fresh snow layer created a smooth, uniform surface, obscuring any possibility of identifying movement tracks from earlier hours. From the Hanlon house as the starting point, the deputy identified 3 mandatory departure directions for anyone in the area: east toward the main dirt road of the town, west around the auxiliary livestock area behind the house, and north into the sparsely traveled open land near the edge of the neighborhood. For each direction, the deputy marked locations on the area map and established temporary reference points for later comparison if new evidence appeared. In strong winds, any attempt to follow tracks was extremely difficult. Continuously falling snow covered any potential earlier tracks within minutes. The deputy observed the snow surface in each direction and noted no differences in compression or anomalies, features that would typically appear if a person or vehicle had passed recently. This forced the deputy to rely more on inference than visual evidence. If Mark left in the pickup as Elaine stated, tire tracks should have been visible at least for a short distance near the exit. But hours of strong wind had leveled everything as though no movement had occurred. The deputy continued checking around the family's shed, where Mark had stood for a few minutes around 8 p.m., before re-entering the house for the last time. Snow had piled high on the roof and around the shed base, with no sunken areas or disturbances suggesting Mark had returned to that spot after leaving. The front yard and the path leading to the side road were also thoroughly checked, but the results were the same: no footprints, no drag marks, no compressed grooves in the snow indicating direction of travel. The deputy noted that weather conditions had eliminated the possibility of direct visual analysis, and the search would need to expand to the eastern dirt roads and secondary routes leading to the farm. While moving west, the direction Mark was believed to have taken to check the auxiliary pens, the deputy continuously scanned both sides of the road, but still detected no changes in the snow surface, even at points where experience suggested tire tracks or footprints would remain visible before being completely covered. Along the small trees lining the road, snow clung higher than normal, indicating gusting winds, further supporting the likelihood that any early tracks had been completely erased. Upon completing the 1-mile sweep around the Hanlon house, the deputy paused at the turn onto the dirt road to quickly summarize field observations. No evidence Mark left on foot, no movement around the livestock area, no intact tire tracks near the exit, and the entire search zone showed no anomalies suggesting the direction Mark may have gone. These findings were relayed to Command Center for updating in the missing person file, serving as the basis for prioritizing the next phase of search. The deputy also recorded a critical observation: the hours-long blizzard had wiped out all physical traces, making reconstruction of Mark's route through footprints or tire tracks virtually impossible, forcing the investigation to shift toward indirect evidence. With Level 1 reconnaissance yielding no visual clues, the deputy shifted focus to analyzing likely destinations based on Mark's habits, work responsibilities, and recurring daily behaviors. The key factors for narrowing the search area under conditions where no physical traces remained near the house. The deputy began by recontacting Elaine to gather detailed information about Mark's travel patterns in the weeks and months leading up to his disappearance. According to her account, Mark rarely left home in the evenings except for matters related to the livestock pens or tool checks during winter. The western direction, where the auxiliary farm he regularly tended was located, was the most familiar destination. Another route, per Elaine, was east, leading to the main dirt road that Mark occasionally used to check fences or snow barriers. At the same time, the deputy noted Elaine's comment that Mark sometimes went to the open land to the north to check ditch freezing levels, a task he handled when working construction. Thus, the three most likely destinations were identified: the western livestock pens, the eastern dirt road, and the northern open land. To strengthen this list, the deputy contacted two of Mark's co-workers at the construction company. They confirmed that during icy periods, Mark often checked northern water lines before thick ice formed, and if he found a minor issue, he would handle it himself without notifying anyone. This made the northern direction, normally lightly traveled, more noteworthy. Additionally, another co-worker mentioned that Mark had previously complained about a shaky fence section to the east during an earlier strong wind, which might have prompted him to recheck it if conditions worsened. The deputy recorded all this information and cross-referenced it with Elaine's statement. Although Elaine insisted Mark said he was going west, his habit of handling sudden issues meant the other two directions could not be ruled out. Based on likelihood, the deputy prioritized the routes west ranked first due to Elaine's direct statement, east ranked second due to work-related relevance, north ranked third, but remained within the scope of routes to be considered. The deputy continued analyzing terrain characteristics of each route. West passed through areas with swirling winds that easily erased tracks. East had heavy but level snow, allowing easier vehicle travel. North was mostly unmarked open land, making navigation more difficult. From this, the deputy determined that search teams should prioritize sweeping the western and eastern routes in the next phase, while noting the need for additional manpower for the northern route if the first two yielded no results. This prioritized route list was sent to dispatch for file updating and became a critical basis for subsequent search coordination. To ensure accuracy, the deputy further considered factors that might influence Mark's choice of destination, including the mechanical condition of the pickup, Mark's familiarity with each route, and the possibility he carried support tools when leaving. Elaine confirmed the truck had no recent mechanical issues, making an impromptu route change less likely. However, Mark's habit of immediately addressing problems, especially with fences or ditches, meant the deputy could not rule out the possibility that Mark changed direction to investigate something he found concerning that evening. The deputy also noted that Mark did not typically leave his vehicle in very bad weather unless he encountered an obstacle or breakdown requiring him to get out and check. This increased the likelihood that the direction Mark took was one with a specific reason for him to leave home in dangerous weather. After compiling all collected data, the deputy created a feasibility assessment table for each possible travel direction based on habits, Mark's final words, and relevant terrain factors. West was ranked highest priority because it directly matched what Mark said before leaving. East ranked second due to previous work-related issues. North, though lower probability, was retained for checking if the other two routes produced no results. This assessment table was immediately forwarded to dispatch for synchronization with the search plan and became the primary analytical basis for the next phase of deployment. Immediately after receiving the prioritized route list from the deputy, the Coordination Center decided to activate the Level 2 search team while the blizzard conditions had not yet subsided. The expanded search formation consisted of 4 sheriff's deputies, 2 volunteers experienced in winter terrain, and 1 K-9 unit trained in locating missing persons in deep snow environments. As the units assembled near the Hanlon residence, they quickly established a temporary starting point at the edge of the dirt road heading west, ready to deploy the search formation according to the previously determined priority order. First, the K-9 team was brought to the location where Mark had left the house to collect a scent sample from the jacket still hanging in the living room. The working dog had been trained to detect human scent even when degraded by cold environments, but in blizzard conditions, tracking ability is always significantly impaired. Nevertheless, this remained the only viable method to help the search team establish the victim's initial direction of travel when no physical traces were available. The K-9 team began moving from the west exit of the house under the handler's guidance initially maintaining a slow pace to ensure no weak scent signals were missed. From the gate, the dog paused several times as if catching fleeting scent wafts, but nothing clear enough to determine direction. After advancing another few dozen meters, it showed a stronger reaction and pulled the handler toward the southwest, where the dirt road led to the auxiliary outbuilding area. Although this was not the straight west direction Elaine had described, it still fell within the zone where Mark could plausibly have passed through according to the earlier analysis. Based on this reaction, the search team leader decided to form a line search pattern perpendicular to the direction of travel to sweep the entire area from the dirt road toward the southwest side paths. The team was divided into 3 groups, the K9 group leading to probe direction, the second search group 10 meters behind to check for physical traces buried by the blizzard, the final group marking searched areas and continuously updating the coordination center. Deep snow slowed movement considerably, and every step required probe poles to ensure no sunken snow pockets concealing objects or a person were overlooked. Every few hundred meters, the K9 gave indications of very faint scent detection, but strong winds caused the signal to vanish abruptly. This forced the team leader to continuously adjust the search pattern to adapt to changing terrain and weather conditions. After nearly 40 minutes of sweeping the western line, the team still found no sign of Mark or his means of conveyance. No tire tracks, no footprints, no dropped personal items. Everything was smooth as if no one had ever passed through. Based on the ambiguous but still valuable initial K9 reaction, the search team decided to expand the scope eastward along the dirt road Mark had previously used when checking fences. The expansion plan established a radius of 1.5 to 2 miles from the Hanlon residence to ensure no potential intersection points were missed. When shifting to the eastern line, the K9 was again deployed ahead to reorient. This time its reactions were much weaker, only briefly pausing at 3 locations before completely losing the trail. The team continued the line search pattern, sweeping every meter of snow along the dirt road, but the result remained the same. No indication that Mark had traveled in this direction. At this point, the search shifted to a grid saturation status using the pre-divided grid cells. Each team member was responsible for evaluating small assigned sectors, but all efforts yielded no additional information to determine Mark's location or route. As night deepened, snow fell even heavier, erasing any possibility of detecting minor traces the team might have previously missed. When the team turned to the northern line, the least likely direction according to initial analysis, they maintained the same search protocol as the other 2 lines, but held low expectations because the area was wide open and directly exposed to strong plain winds. As anticipated, no anomalies were found. Continuous wind sweeping across the snow surface erased any potential signs within minutes. After more than 2 hours of comprehensive priority area sweeps, the Level 2 search team had to conclude that no evidence indicated Mark had traveled on foot, no physical proof of an accident near the residential area existed, and all scent tracking efforts were severely limited by strong winds and continuous snowfall. A summary report was sent to the coordination center, concluding that none of the 3 initial probable routes produced results, and that determining Mark's route could not continue relying solely on visual search within a 1 to 2 mile radius around the house. Upon receiving this report, the coordination center immediately forwarded all information to the night duty commander to move into a deeper analysis phase, as the complete absence of traces compelled the sheriff's force to reevaluate the search perimeter based on terrain data and road systems rather than continuing broad expansion. A large-scale area map was spread out on the command table, covering the entire region around the Hanlon residence, secondary dirt roads, low ditches, sparse forest, and especially the routes leading toward Lake Sakakawea. Via radio, the deputy was asked to precisely provide coordinates of all areas searched at both Level 1 and Level 2, so they could be marked on the map, thereby clearly identifying fully checked zones and areas still unexamined due to weather obstruction. Most of the 1 mile radius around the house had been swept. The western and eastern lines had been checked laterally. The northern line, though broad, had been covered at key points. Thick snow and strong winds could bury all traces, but the fact that none of the 3 lines showed any signal whatsoever forced the center to consider an alternative possibility. Mark may have traveled far beyond the initial perimeter, and that direction must be one where he had specific reason to go despite the weather. The deputy reported the weak but relatively consistent K9 reaction in the southwest, though not strong enough for sustained tracking. This led the night commander to re-examine the area between west and southwest on the map, where dirt roads intersected and led farther out into wider terrain, particularly along the indirect axis toward Lake Sakakawea. The area around the lake was marked as high risk in winter due to thin ice and strong northwest winds blowing downward. But Mark, according to colleagues, was familiar with the region, having worked on a project near the lakeshore several years earlier. These details made the lake direction stand out more prominently in the analysis. To further narrow the search area, the commander requested additional information from the deputy about possible reasons Mark might have traveled through larger areas beyond the original 3 directions. Elaine had said he went to check the western outbuildings, but that did not rule out Mark changing course. Many people who knew Mark also reported his habit of extending inspection routes during bad weather, especially if concerned about fence sections or field equipment being damaged by wind. On the topographic map, 2 routes led from the western outbuilding area along dirt roads, curving south, then gradually rising to higher ground before descending toward the southeast, where a small, seldom-used shortcut once led to the lake. This route was uncommon and rarely traveled, but that very fact made it a plausible place for Mark to have visited if he suspected a problem. The night commander marked this route in red ink, considering it a high-potential direction requiring close examination. Next, the commander ruled out several less likely directions. Northeast led too far into wilderness, away from Mark's usual routes. South connected to town, which was inconsistent, since Mark had not informed anyone of going elsewhere. Besides the outbuildings, north had already been checked by the search team, with no unusual findings. Thus, only 2 directions provided sufficient reason for Mark to travel farther into the night, an extended western route and the southwest route leading toward the lake area. When comparing these 2 directions on the map, the commander noticed a noteworthy point. The western route, after about 1 mile, intersected a small downhill turnoff that directly connected to the old agricultural dirt road network. Though rarely used, this turnoff would be logical if Mark wanted to check fences or ditches before weather deteriorated further. Moreover, its location coincided precisely with the spot where the K9 showed the weakest, but still present, scent reaction, providing some directional value despite uncertainty. The night commander ordered a quick distance analysis from the Hanlon residence to this intersection point. The total length was roughly 1.5 miles or slightly more, enough for Mark to reach it in 10 to 15 minutes by vehicle. From that junction, if Mark turned southwest, he would enter an area of strong crosswinds and deep snow accumulation, though still traversable if the vehicle did not get stuck. And if he continued along the old dirt road, the journey would lead toward Lake Sakakawea, an area of complex terrain with numerous snowdrifts, hollows, and alternating high and low ground. After cross-referencing all routes on the map and eliminating those inconsistent with Mark's realistic travel patterns, the commander concluded that the route toward Lake Sakakawea must be immediately prioritized for deployment. Not only did it represent the most likely direction Mark had traveled, but the terrain characteristics there carried high risk, meaning any incident that occurred would require the earliest possible detection. The search perimeter was adjusted and expanded beyond the initial radius. The map was updated with key topographic features such as sliding slopes, snow accumulation zones, wind corridors, and seldom-used turnoffs. Upon completing the assessment, the Coordination Center issued the official directive to expand the search southwestward along the lake-bound route, marking a clear shift in focus toward tracing the final journey of Mark Hanlon on the night he went missing. As soon as the directive was transmitted, the search team immediately moved to the southwest area along the previously marked old dirt road under blizzard conditions that had eased slightly but still featured strong intermittent wind gusts that continuously obscured visibility. Upon reaching the junction between the western route and the branch leading toward Lake Sakakawea, team members began noticing anomalies on the terrain surface A long, narrow depression in the deep snow ran parallel to the wind direction, suggesting a large object had remained stationary there long enough to be partially buried by drifting snow. Recognizing this sign, the team leader ordered reduced speed, high-intensity headlights activated, and a careful scan of both sides of the road. Just over 300 meters farther, in the flickering light reflecting off the snow, a blurred metallic shape appeared beneath the thick white cover. As the vehicle approached, the search team identified it as Mark Hanlon's green Ford F-150, the very vehicle both family and colleagues confirmed he had used when leaving the house. This discovery fell within the expanded radius just determined through map analysis, reinforcing the hypothesis that Mark had traveled toward the lake, or intended to check the surrounding area. The team leader ordered all headlights dimmed to avoid disturbing the scene, and proceeded with external assessment of the vehicle without yet opening doors or moving anything. The truck was buried in snow nearly to the door level, indicating it had been there for many hours. The driver's door was fully closed, as was the passenger door. No signs of forced entry, pulling, or external collision were visible. Snow covered the vehicle evenly, with no indication anyone had recently attempted to open doors or move around it. The front of the vehicle faced slightly south, differing from the expected direction from house to outbuildings, suggesting Mark had deliberately changed course or turned onto this branch road. The search team recorded the vehicle's position by placing 2 wooden markers at set intervals per 1981. Regulations to facilitate later scene measurement by the investigation unit. One member used a measuring tape to determine the distance from the truck to the edge of the dirt road, noting that the vehicle sat more than 1.5 meters off the road and not parallel to the road axis, as though the driver had stopped abruptly or the truck had slid slightly before coming to rest. Observation of the surrounding snow surface revealed no human footprints in front of or behind the vehicle. However, this did not rule out the possibility of footprints existing when Mark stopped, but being completely buried by hours of snowfall. The area near the wheels was examined more closely, revealing thicker snow buildup under the rear of the chassis, likely because the vehicle had remained stationary long enough for more snow to accumulate in the less windy zone. The front wheels were sunk slightly deeper than the rear ones, suggesting the truck may have been stopped while decelerating or experienced brief sliding on thin ice beneath the snow. All these observations were logged into the scene notebook by the search team. After cordoning off the area around the vehicle, the team leader ordered an expanded check radius of at least 30 meters to ensure no personal items, movement traces, or other physical evidence related to Mark were overlooked. 3 members formed a circular search pattern around the truck, probing suspicious raised or depressed snow spots with poles. 1 member marked each checked position with small wooden stakes per regulation for later identification by the investigation team. However, after 20 minutes of detailed inspection, the team found no additional traces beyond the vehicle itself. No drag marks, no personal items, no signs of collision or forced activity in the vicinity. This increased the likelihood that Mark had left the vehicle many hours earlier or departed in a direction where snow had erased all evidence. The search team noted that the most probable open direction from the vehicle's position was southwest, where lower terrain extended deeper toward the lake, though this remained an initial assessment given the weather and terrain made all directions feasible. After completing the cordon and ensuring no disturbance around the vehicle, the team leader immediately radioed the coordination center to report the major discovery and recommended forwarding the information to the sheriff to activate scene examination procedures per regulation. Locating Mark's Ford F-150 marked the first major turning point since the missing person case was opened, shifting the entire search focus toward scene evaluation, determining whether Mark had suffered an incident here or whether this was merely an intermediate stopping point before he continued into wider, more dangerous terrain. Immediately after the report was received, the Williams County Sheriff ordered deployment of the scene investigation team per 1981 procedures, consisting of 2 investigators, 1 scene technician, and 1 supporting deputy for data recording. Due to slippery roads and limited visibility, the team took nearly 30 minutes to reach the vehicle location. Upon arrival, they immediately began by accurately recording scene coordinates, measuring distance from the truck to the dirt road edge, and marking surrounding natural features such as low tree clusters and the gentle slope leading south. The vehicle was determined to be angled approximately 25 degrees off the road axis, with the front facing south rather than parallel to the road, as in a normal parking position. A detail considered significant as it might reflect the final direction of travel or a situation forcing Mark to stop suddenly. The investigation team continued checking tire tracks, but nearly 8 inches of snow accumulated over many hours had completely buried tread patterns, leaving only slight depressions indicating the vehicle had not moved since stopping. The technician used a probe rod to measure depth in front of and behind each wheel. Results showed the front wheels sunk 1 to 2 inches deeper than the rear, most likely indicating the truck stopped while decelerating or slid briefly down a small incline before stabilizing. This was insufficient to conclude loss of control, but worth documenting as it could reflect road conditions or the driver's actions in the final moment. When observing in the direction of travel, the team noted that snow behind the vehicle was less deep than in front, supporting the hypothesis that the truck had remained stationary for many consecutive hours. Determining the stopping orientation was critical to establishing whether Mark intended to continue farther toward the lake or had stopped here to address something. The investigation team moved on to recording the vehicle's condition. The driver's door was checked first and found unlocked. The door handle felt noticeably colder than expected, suggesting no recent contact. The passenger door was in similar condition. The technician inspected the windows and confirmed all 4 were fully closed, with no cracks or breaks. The front end showed no impact damage. The bumper was unscratched, and snow on the hood remained undisturbed. When the driver's door was gently opened to avoid spilling snow inside, they noted the interior dome light was not on, raising the question of whether the electrical system had been fully shut off or the light had failed due to cold. Dashboard inspection showed the light switch in the OF position, consistent with the driver shutting off the engine before exiting. The gear selector was in park, consistent with an intentional stop rather than sliding off the road. This indicated Mark had deliberately stopped the vehicle rather than it sliding or being forced to halt abruptly. The key was not in the ignition, a significant detail because if Mark had left in haste or been pulled out, the key would typically remain in place. However, no immediate conclusion could be drawn as personal habits vary. When checking around the vehicle for footprints or physical traces, the investigation team observed uniform, nearly completely flat surfaces. Hours of continuous snowfall had covered everything, making it impossible at present to determine the direction Mark left the truck. The team attempted to isolate areas with differing snow height, but found no clear depressions identifiable as footprints. Investigators noted wind-drifted snow on the west side of the vehicle forming sastrugi patterns, which could have distorted any faint traces that once existed. When direct surface signs could not be collected, the investigation team proceeded to establish the scene perimeter per 1981 procedures. They used nylon cord to mark a 30-meter radius around the vehicle and drove 6 wooden stakes to secure the boundary. A single designated access path was marked to prevent further disturbance. The team recorded the time boundary establishment began, current weather conditions, and wind direction for later evaluation of environmental impact on evidence preservation. A quick sketch was drawn in the notebook, clearly showing the vehicle position, front orientation, the slight forward slope, and other terrain features such as the low tree cluster approximately 10 meters southeast of the truck. All documentation followed Williams County scene investigation standards of the period. After completing scene perimeter setup, the investigation team informed the sheriff that the vehicle had been preserved in original condition. Outdoor traces were no longer traceable due to complete snow coverage, and they requested permission to proceed with interior vehicle inspection per the next regulatory step. Finding the vehicle with no signs of accident or extended sliding, yet clearly stopped intentionally, made the scene far more significant than initially anticipated, as it could represent the last known point where Mark Hanlon appeared before completely vanishing into that snowy white night. After the crime scene around the Ford F-150 had been fully secured with boundaries established according to procedure, the forensics team, having received approval from the sheriff, proceeded to open the vehicle doors to collect evidence inside, prioritizing items that could indicate why Mark had stopped the truck for a specific reason. The technician put on gloves and opened the driver's side door, noting that the air inside the vehicle was cold but showed no unusual condensation. Under the cup holder, a silver metal tumbler lay on its side, without a lid and with no liquid remaining inside. The tumbler was collected first because this drinking vessel could be linked to Mark's daily habits or might have been brought from home. The technician placed it in a specialized paper evidence bag, labeled it Evidence #1, metal tumbler, driver's seat area, and temporarily sealed it. Continuing to the passenger seat area, the team discovered a crumpled and slightly damp-edged paper map that had been hastily stuffed into the gap between the seat and the dashboard. The map was not fully unfolded, so the specific area Mark had marked or intended to review could not be determined. It was collected as Evidence #2, crumpled paper map, passenger seat area, and placed in a flat evidence envelope to prevent further damage. The technician noted that the map showed multiple fold creases, indicating prior use, rather than being a completely new document. In the glove compartment on the right side, the team found a small red pocket calendar with slightly worn corners and numerous pencil notes inside. The calendar was considered significant evidence because it could contain information about Mark's schedule, places he intended to visit, or appointments related to the day of his disappearance. It was immediately sealed as Evidence #3, pocket calendar, glove compartment. The technician recorded that the last entry in the calendar was dated 1 week before the disappearance, but no detailed analysis was performed at the scene since the primary task was to preserve the original condition of the evidence. While checking the floor under the passenger seat, a torn white scrap of paper was found caught under the rubber mat. The fragment was small, with some characters illegible due to a diagonal tear indicating it was part of a larger sheet. The investigator instructed the technician to use forceps to avoid direct contact. The scrap was placed in a preservation bag and assigned Evidence #4, torn paper, passenger side floor. Although small in size, this scrap was still considered important because any document present in the vehicle at the time Mark vanished could help determine his route or intentions. After collecting these 4 main pieces of evidence, the team continued checking the remaining areas of the vehicle to ensure nothing had been overlooked. The storage compartment behind the driver's seat contained only a few basic tools, such as an old flashlight, some tie-down straps, and a box of screws, all items Mark typically carried when inspecting livestock pens, and were therefore not classified as significant evidence. The rear floor was thoroughly checked, but revealed nothing noteworthy. The remaining compartments also contained no unusual personal items, such as a wallet, phone, or food, meaning the assessment of why he stopped had to rely on the evidence already collected. Each item was recorded on the evidence form in accordance with 1981 procedures, including location of recovery, time of collection, person collecting it, and condition when found. The technician completed a rough interior layout sketch to document the relative positions of the evidence items within the cabin. The team then placed all evidence into a large preservation container, sealed it, and labeled it for transfer to the sheriff's office lab for detailed analysis the following morning. The entire evidence log was compiled on-site to ensure chain of custody continuity and transparency, preventing any suspicion of loss or mix-up. Upon completion, the forensics team reported that evidence collection inside the vehicle had been fully completed according to 1981 standards, and the 4 main pieces, metal tumbler, crumpled map, pocket calendar, and torn paper scrap, would serve as critical initial evidence for understanding why Mark stopped and which direction he may have headed after leaving the vehicle. After completing evidence collection inside the vehicle and securing the scene, the search team was ordered to expand the sweep radius around the F-150 to 2 to 3 miles to determine whether Mark might have left the truck and walked into the surrounding area. This expansion was based on the assumption that Mark may have exited the vehicle to address some issue or to find his way back under limited visibility caused by the blizzard. The search formation was divided into 3 directions. One group headed southwest along the sloping terrain toward Lake Sakakawea. The second swept southeast, where the terrain was flatter. The third moved west along old trails weaving between low-lying land strips. Although weather conditions had improved, the snow remained thick, making it nearly impossible to identify old footprints or depressions because surface signs had been smoothed or reshaped by wind over the past few hours. While the southwest group moved into the low-lying area, one member spotted an unusual color against the snow, a small green fabric fragment partially covered by snow, but still clearly visible due to the contrasting color. The fragment was located nearly 1 mile southwest of the vehicle, on the edge of a natural slope leading downward. Upon approach, the team lifted the fabric with gloved hands and determined it was a rectangular piece of woven material with uneven torn edges, most likely once part of a jacket or work clothing. Since Elaine had stated Mark was wearing a brown jacket and blue jeans, the color of this fragment could be related to the victim's clothing, though further verification was needed. The fragment was immediately designated Evidence #5 and placed in a specialized preservation bag to protect it from snow moisture. After securing the fabric, the search group examined the surrounding area. The terrain showed strong, ongoing wind patterns. Snow had drifted into ridges of varying sizes, creating complex surface distortions. Nevertheless, 2 points were noted. The snow layer at the slope edge was lower than the surrounding area, suggesting something or someone may have stood or fallen there before fresh snow accumulated again. And about 5 meters downslope, there was a small depression, not very deep, but distinctly different from the rest of the snow surface. Although no firm conclusion could be drawn, this anomaly was recorded for later terrain analysis by scene technicians. The team continued searching the depression and slope, but found no additional physical traces, no drag marks, no personal items, and no clear signs of struggle. Snowfall from hours earlier made identification of older signs virtually impossible. Some members probed the snow with poles to check for buried objects, but all suspicious points were confirmed as natural snow deformations caused by wind. The southeast group reported similar results, flat terrain, but no signs of Mark passing through. Meanwhile, the west group examined old trails and small bends, but likewise found no additional evidence or movement signs. This left the green fabric fragment as the only piece of evidence within the 2 to 3 mile radius around the vehicle. The search team leader ordered all groups to return near the vehicle to consolidate information. The report stated, the green fabric was found in an area of strong swirling winds. No drag marks or struggle signs were present nearby. Terrain deformation from the blizzard prevented determination of when the fragment separated from clothing, if it belonged to Mark. Nevertheless, the fragment's discovery nearly 1 mile southwest of the vehicle strengthened the hypothesis that Mark may have left the truck in that direction. No body or human remains were discovered throughout the expanded search area. Upon concluding the expanded check, the team immediately reported to command and added Evidence #5 to the temporary list, requesting further analysis to determine whether the material or fibers matched clothing Mark was wearing on the night he disappeared. The discovery of the green fabric, though small and inconclusive, marked the first piece of evidence directly tied to the area surrounding the vehicle and the only indication of the direction Mark may have taken before vanishing in the heavy snow-covered night of North Dakota. Immediately after the search team reported finding the green fabric and locating no further traces around the vehicle, the sheriff directed an expansion of the investigation into verifying all of Mark's activities prior to leaving home, in order to build a more accurate timeline and determine whether anyone had contact with or appeared near Mark in his final hours. A deputy was assigned to revisit the gas station Elaine had mentioned earlier, where Mark had stopped that afternoon to buy snacks and cigarettes. The small station was on the edge of Williston, a regular stop for field workers because of its proximity to the main road leading to western ranches. When the deputy spoke with the evening shift employee, he recalled Mark stopping between approximately 5:45 and 6 p.m., a time he remembered because the wall clock showed exactly that while he was checking the pump. The employee described Mark as looking tired but normal, not rushed, and showing no signs of distress or intoxication. He purchased 2 packs of cigarettes, a pack of snacks, and paid in cash. There was no notable conversation beyond casual small talk, and Mark left heading west as usual. However, when the deputy asked about any other vehicles present around the time Mark departed, the employee immediately recalled that 5 to 10 minutes after Mark left, a black SUV with no visible license plate pulled into the lot, but did not refuel. The driver did not exit the vehicle, only stopped for a few seconds before turning around and leaving in the same direction Mark had gone. The employee remembered this clearly because the stop was unusual and the interior lights were off, drawing his attention as darkness had fallen quickly. When asked for more details, he described the SUV as an older model, with somewhat tinted windows, no clear identifying marks, and only the driver visible inside. The deputy recorded this detail and considered it indirect witness information, suggesting the presence of a vehicle that could have influenced Mark's journey before his disappearance, though the degree of relevance remained undetermined. Additionally, the deputy inquired about other customers around that time, but the employee confirmed no one else was present at the same moment Mark left. After leaving the gas station, the deputy contacted a regular small truck driver in the area, who typically fueled up around 6:10 p.m. This driver said he had not seen Mark, but clearly remembered the black SUV because it was moving quite slowly before merging onto the main road. Although it could not be confirmed whether this SUV was connected to Mark, the 2 separate accounts of its appearance made the gas station timeline more significant for analyzing Mark's movements. The deputy then recorded this in the report to update timeline version 2. In the new timeline, the key points were 5:45, 6 p.m., Mark arrives at gas station, makes purchases, and leaves normally. Approx. 6 o'clock, 6:10 p.m. Unidentified black SUV appears, stops briefly, then departs in the same direction as Mark. 7 p.m. Mark has dinner with family at home. 8 p.m. Mark goes outside to check machinery near the barn. 8:45 p.m. Mark says he will check the western livestock pens and leaves home in the pickup truck. 2:19 a.m. Elaine reports him missing. Adding the 2 statements about the black SUV not only made the timeline more detailed, but also marked the first indication that another vehicle may have been present near Mark while he was traveling the road leading to where the truck was later found. The deputy submitted the updated timeline version 2 to Command for synchronization across all search and investigation efforts, ensuring all personnel were aware of the new time markers in a situation where physical traces outside the scene had been erased by snow. Thanks to this, Mark's afternoon activities before disappearing became clearer, providing a stronger foundation for subsequent analysis of his direction of travel and the possibility of an incident after leaving home. After timeline version 2 was updated and information about the unidentified black SUV recorded, the sheriff ordered an expansion of the investigation into all of Mark's relationships to determine whether his disappearance could be connected to personal conflicts, financial disputes, or factors beyond the family sphere. A deputy was assigned to contact individuals who worked with Mark at the construction company in Williston, where he had been employed for many years and had familiar relationships with the crew. At the company, Mark's 2 closest co-workers confirmed that in the week before his disappearance, he worked normally with no signs of anxiety or distress. However, one mentioned that Mark had appeared tense when discussing the family's financial situation, especially because harsh winters meant lower income while home repair costs increased. Another coworker recalled Mark mentioning a minor disagreement with a local rancher regarding fence installation, but nothing serious enough to create lasting conflict. When questioned further, no one recalled Mark having intense personal disputes or receiving threats from anyone recently. However, While reviewing payroll records and advances Mark received in the most recent month, the deputy noted several small cash advances Mark had taken to cover family expenses. This was not unusual, but indicated Mark was experiencing greater than normal financial strain. This detail was included in the risk assessment report, as financial stress can sometimes lead to unusual behavior or hasty decisions. Continuing the investigation beyond work, the deputy contacted several close friends of Mark mentioned by the family. One friend who had known Mark since high school said that recently Mark had socialized less, mostly staying home, and during their last meeting, had remarked that things at home aren't as smooth as before. He provided no further details, but the comment drew the sheriff's attention to the possibility of conflict within the Hanlon family, something Elaine had never mentioned in the initial report. When the deputy later returned to speak with Elaine for clarification, she appeared uncomfortable when asked about the state of their marriage. She only said they had a few small disagreements, like any other couple. However, when financial difficulties were brought up, Elaine paused noticeably longer than usual and simply said, "Mark always carried a lot of pressure, especially in winter." This reaction prompted the deputy to note possible concealment or minimization of family conflict information, though there was still insufficient basis for a conclusion. Additionally, the sheriff requested contact with individuals indirectly connected to Mark's work and routine, including Delilah Rowe, the family's occasional hired hand, who sometimes helped Mark repair tools or watch the livestock pens when he was away. Delilah lived about 5 miles east of the Hanlon home. When asked about Mark, she described him as quiet but always kind. However, when questioned about the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Delilah said there was one occasion when she saw Mark and Elaine arguing outside in the yard, with Mark's voice louder than usual. She couldn't hear the content, but remembered Mark leaving immediately afterward, without his usual goodbye. Delilah also mentioned that in recent months, Mark had asked her to check certain tools because they had been unusually damaged, though the cause was unclear. When asked about changes in Mark's behavior, she said he seemed more cautious, often carrying a small notebook and checking locks multiple times when working at the pens. These details caused the deputy's report to lean toward the possibility that Mark was under some personal pressure he had not shared with coworkers. When asked whether anyone besides Mark and herself regularly visited the livestock pens area, Delilah recalled that about 3 weeks before Mark disappeared, she had seen an unfamiliar black SUV passing along the western side of the Hanlon property. She wasn't sure of the exact make because it was dark and the vehicle didn't stop, but this description matched the gas station employee's account, creating the first point of intersection between local witness information and Mark's movement timeline. After recording Delilah's statement, the deputy reported that none of Mark's relationships showed overt hostility, but there were emerging signs of family tension, financial difficulty, and the repeated presence of an unfamiliar black SUV near the Hanlon property. These elements were compiled into a new assessment document, marking the first time the investigation revealed an intersection between signs of family conflict, the victim's personal stress, and the unusual appearance of a black SUV at times and locations directly related to Mark's disappearance. After completing the verification of Mark's relationships and gathering scattered information from family, friends, colleagues, and witnesses at the gas station, the sheriff requested a comprehensive timeline compilation of all time data for another cross-check, as the newly obtained details had begun to create important intersection points while also revealing notable contradictions. The deputy was assigned the task of comparing each data source and creating the third version of the timeline, the version expected to most accurately reflect Mark's movements on December 18, 1981. First, the timeline from Elaine was recorded exactly as per her initial statement. Mark returned home around 6 p.m., had dinner with the family at 7 p.m., went out to the yard to check tools around 8 p.m., and left the house at 8:45 p.m., with the stated reason of checking the western livestock pens. According to Elaine, Mark received no phone calls, had no contact with anyone, and showed no signs of anything unusual before leaving. This was the timeline entered into the case file from the very beginning and served as the reference basis for the search teams. However, when cross-referenced with the timestamps from the gas station and the statements of the staff there, several conflicting details began to emerge. The gas station attendant clearly remembered Mark stopping by between 5:45 and 6 p.m., buying snacks and cigarettes, and leaving in a normal state. This timing fully aligned with Mark arriving home around 6 p.m. As per Elaine's account, providing solid confirmation for the early part of the day, but differences started appearing afterward. According to the gas station employee, a black SUV appeared about 5 to 10 minutes after Mark left the station and traveled in the same direction toward Mark's house. The truck driver's statement also indicated that the SUV was moving unusually, driving slowly as if observing something. This created the first point not present in Elaine's statement, since she insisted she had no knowledge of or heard any other vehicle appearing near the house before Mark left. Next, the physical evidence was analyzed. Inside Mark's vehicle, there was a metal cup, a crumpled map, a pocket calendar, and a torn piece of paper. The map was not fully unfolded, but its position on the passenger seat suggested Mark may have examined it before stopping the vehicle or right before leaving home. This implied that Mark had a reason to consider an alternative route, not simply going to check the Western Pens. This slightly contradicted Elaine's statement that Mark was only going to a single location and made no mention of looking at a map. The pocket calendar opened up even more possibilities. It contained several work notes and some unclear markings during the week Mark disappeared, though they could not yet be examined in detail at the scene. The fact that Mark had the calendar and map in the vehicle suggested he had plans or tasks to carry out, far beyond a simple check of the livestock pens. This again was not included in what Elaine provided. The torn piece of paper found under the car mat was not mentioned in any of Elaine's descriptions of what Mark carried or used that day. It could be an unrelated item, but its presence suggested Mark may have made a note or reviewed something before leaving the vehicle and disappearing. When the physical evidence was incorporated into the preliminary analysis, it became clear that Mark did not leave the house on a short, simple, or familiar errand, as Elaine described. At the same time, the crumpled map with multiple fold marks indicated Mark had looked at it recently. Combining these elements, the deputy began compiling timeline version 3, 5:45, 6 p.m. Mark appears at the gas station, staff confirm normal condition, 6 o'clock, 6:10 p.m. Black SUV appears, stops briefly, then follows in the direction Mark went, 6 o'clock, 7 p.m. Mark returns home and has dinner with the family. 8 p.m. Mark goes to the yard to check tools, purpose unclear during this period. 8:45 p.m. Mark leaves home, taking the map and items in the vehicle. Elaine describes the trip as checking the Western livestock pens. 9 o'clock, 8 p.m. No confirmed information. Evidence in the vehicle indicates Mark may have reviewed the map before or during the journey. Afterward, vehicle found heading southwest, not fully matching the direction Elaine provided. 2:19 a.m. Elaine reports in missing. When these points were placed side by side, the contradiction stood out clearly. The vehicle's direction of travel did not match Elaine's account. The appearance of the black SUV was absent from any family description. The evidence suggested Mark may have changed direction or had other plans, and the period between 8 p.m. and when Mark left the house was not fully explained. While creating a time frame that forced investigators to re-examine the entire sequence of events before Mark disappeared completely on that winter night in 1981. After Timeline version 3 was compiled and revealed clear contradictions between statements, physical evidence, and Mark's actual journey, the sheriff determined that the scope of the disappearance could no longer be limited to the area around the vehicle, but must be expanded to cover the entire region leading down to Lake Sakakawea and the scattered thin forest to the south. This was a vast area with complex terrain and many spots capable of concealing traces, so the sheriff decided to launch the largest-scale search operation since the case began. Mobilizing nearly 70 people including sheriff's deputies, local volunteers, the Lake Region Rescue Team, 2 K-9 units, and an aerial observation helicopter crew. The entire search force gathered at 8 a.m. the following morning at the temporary command post, where a large map displayed the possible routes Mark may have taken according to the new timeline. The sheriff divided the force into 5 main groups. Group 1 swept the sparse forest area to the southwest, where the terrain consisted of low hills interspersed with snow patches. Group 2 checked the area near the lake shore, where early-season ice could be thin and dangerous if Mark stepped wrong. Group 3 advanced toward small canyons near the elevated southern ridge. Group 4 swept the remote wild grassland. The final group coordinated the helicopter for high-level observation. Each group was equipped with radios, marker stakes, and printed maps. Due to heavy snowfall overnight, the search teams had to move in wide formation, with each person spaced about 3 to 5 meters apart, forming a large horizontal line as they advanced into the forest. The K-9 teams were placed at the front of Group 1 because the forest vegetation was more likely to retain scents than open areas. However, the deep cold and wind still made it difficult for the K-9s to maintain tracking ability. Many forest locations had snow up to knee height, forcing the groups to move slowly and probe every section of ground. By near noon, Group 1 had swept part of the forest but found no physical traces such as scraps of cloth, personal items, or any distinctly different depressions. Group 2, responsible for the lakeshore area, had to be especially cautious because early winter ice was uneven, with many places having groundwater flowing underneath that made the surface thinner. They used long poles to test hardness and mark dangerous zones. Although the lake was wide with many wind hollows, the group found no footprints or any ice cracks suggesting a person had fallen through. The observation team noted that the ice in this area appeared largely undisturbed during the recent period, but strong winds may have erased any signs if they had existed. Group 3 advanced deep into the small canyons between elevated ridges. This was rugged terrain with steep sections and deep crevices that could cause a person to become trapped. The search team used safety ropes to descend and check each canyon. However, all rock slides or slip areas were determined to be natural, with no signs of human fall or climbing attempts. The even snow cover prevented any clear traces from remaining on canyon surfaces. Meanwhile, Group 4 swept the remote grassland to the southeast. This was the widest and most open area, with constant strong winds making it very difficult to maintain formation. Snow here was flattened by wind into uniform layers, completely hiding any possibility of identifying footprints. The team moved in a zigzag pattern to avoid missing hidden spots behind mounds or dry grass clumps, but still found nothing beyond traces of small animals. From the air, the helicopter covered a much wider range, especially focusing on areas with deformed terrain, such as depressions, wind hollows, or rock outcrops. The pilot made multiple passes over the southwest area, where the piece of fabric had been found, but saw no other large objects protruding from the snow. The helicopter also flew along the lake shore looking for ice openings, but the ice surface remained largely intact in most nearshore areas. Some color variations were noted, but determined to be wind-compressed snow rather than impact fractures. By early afternoon, when the groups returned to the temporary assembly point, the sheriff requested a compilation of results from all 70 participants. Reports showed no new activity or anomalies after the F-150 was discovered. No personal items, no signs of ice structure disturbance, no evidence of pedestrian movement beyond the search team members. This made locating Mark far more difficult, as the possible area he could have traversed was too vast and older traces had been erased by wind. However, what the sheriff particularly noted was the absolute silence of the scene. There were no signs that Mark had suffered an accident in any searched area, no signs of struggle, dragging, or assault. This made the entire large-scale search, even though it yielded no specific results, an important piece in ruling out many possibilities and narrowing down what might have happened to Mark after he left the vehicle during the North Dakota blizzard night. After the large-scale search involving more than 70 people failed to produce any clear trace of Mark's presence in the forest, canyons, or lakeshore areas, the sheriff convened a wrap-up meeting that same afternoon to evaluate all data collected during 3 consecutive days of investigation. The first and most important conclusion was the absence of a body, biological traces, or personal items beyond what was recovered from the vehicle, making it impossible for investigators to determine whether Mark had suffered an accident, left voluntarily, or become the victim of a crime. In 1981, the lack of a body meant no specific criminal investigative direction could be established, as there was no evidence to prove a crime had occurred. The collected evidence, the metal cup, crumpled map, pocket calendar, torn paper, and green fabric scrap, though properly processed, remained completely disjointed. None created a direct link to any specific act. The map did not prove Mark planned to go elsewhere. The pocket calendar was just a daily item. The torn paper lacked information, and the green fabric could not be confirmed as belonging to Mark, since his clothing, when leaving home, did not match that color. The technical team also noted no signs of force, no drag marks, or disturbance around the vehicle, giving the criminal investigation direction no solid foundation to pursue. From witness contacts, the sheriff noted that Mark had no clear personal enemies, no debts serious enough to prompt threats, and no major work disputes causing significant conflict. The black SUV that appeared at the gas station and near the Hanlon residence was noteworthy, but lacked sufficient evidence to link it to Mark's disappearance. No license plate was recorded, no direct witness saw the SUV approach Mark, and no corresponding physical traces were found at the scene. Tensions within the Hanlon family, though mentioned by some neighbors, showed no signs of violence or serious conflict before Mark's disappearance. This information left the investigation in a state where no conclusion could be reached. Every direction remained open, but none had evidence to pursue to the end. The sheriff also analyzed that Mark's decision to leave home at 8:45 p.m. during a strong blizzard could lead to many scenarios. He might have had an accident, become lost and exhausted, or tried to walk and find a way, only to fall into deep snow. But the lack of any signs within the wide search radius made these hypotheses impossible to verify. North Dakota terrain, especially around Lake Sakakawea, can cover traces very quickly. However, the absence of a body or signs of slipping, ice cracking, collision, or spontaneous rescue activity made determining that Mark had an accident nearly impossible. With search teams having swept the entire area over 3 consecutive days and weather conditions continuing to deteriorate, the sheriff was forced to issue the official conclusion for the 1981 investigation phase. The case was recorded as missing person, unresolved, meaning an unexplained disappearance with no evidence of crime, no suspects, and no open investigative leads. All files, including Timeline Version 3, collected evidence, scene diagrams, and witness statements, were deemed insufficient to continue large-scale search operations under dangerous conditions. The sheriff's office prepared procedures to seal evidence, close active investigation files, and move the case to passive monitoring status. The sheriff also notified the Hanlon family that the search would be temporarily suspended due to no new leads to follow, while promising that if new information emerged in the future, the case would be reopened. This was the official conclusion for the 1981 investigation phase, a conclusion that provided no answers to Mark Hanlon's disappearance, leaving a large void in the case file and in the lives of those involved. With no new traces found, and Mark's status undetermined, the sheriff's office was required to complete standard procedures to transfer the entire case to cold case status in early 1982. The process began with sealing all collected evidence, the metal cup, crumpled map, pocket calendar, torn paper, and green fabric scrap, each placed in separate evidence bags, numbered in the chain of custody sequence, and sealed with wax stamps per the standards of the time. Each item was hand-recorded in the evidence logbook, detailing the date of collection, location, responsible officer, condition of the item, and reason for storage. Because forensic technology in 1981 was limited, the sheriff's office could only preserve evidence physically, with no capability to analyze fibers, ink, or microscopic traces, as would become possible later. All evidence was then transferred to the Williams County Evidence Storage Room, a small room with wooden shelves and metal cabinets where unsolved missing persons cases were kept until new information surfaced. After the evidence was sealed, the sheriff prepared the official case file, assigning it the code Cold Case, Missing Person, 1981-244. The file included all handwritten reports, vehicle location diagrams, all timeline versions, witness statements, search operation summaries, and lists of all personnel involved for future cross-referencing if the case were reopened. One copy was placed in the county's main archive, the other retained at the sheriff's office. In the final notes, the sheriff clearly stated the limitations of the investigation at that time: extremely harsh weather conditions that erased all snow traces within hours, low-level forensic technology, unable to perform deep evidence analysis, lack of modern positioning and search support equipment, vast and complex terrain, especially around Lake Sakakawea, making complete coverage realistically impossible under the circumstances. Additionally, limitations in gathering witness information were noted. The black SUV appeared twice, but had no license plate, no driver description, and no related physical evidence. Statements about family conflict were also not clear enough to open new investigative directions. All elements remained at the level of speculation. Due to the absence of a body, traces, and any clue indicating criminal activity, the sheriff was compelled to classify the case as missing person of undetermined cause and close the active file. On the final day of the sealing log, the sheriff wrote the concluding line: "No evidence indicates this is a criminal case, no clear suspects, insufficient grounds to continue investigation under current conditions." Mark Hanlon's file was placed in the cold case, missing persons drawer, alongside other unsolved disappearances in the county from previous decades. No one in the office at that time could have imagined that this seemingly forgotten case would become one of North Dakota's longest-running files, a file closed not because answers were found, but because every path to answers vanished beneath the very thick snow that swallowed Mark's traces on that winter night long ago. In the 27 years after Mark Hanlon's file was sealed, the missing person case gradually slipped into obscurity, like many other cold cases in the North Dakota region, only being mentioned when family members inquired or when new personnel in the sheriff's office reviewed dormant cases to learn procedures. The file was reviewed 3 times, in 1986, 1993, and 1999, but none of these efforts produced any progress. The first review, in 1986, occurred when the newly appointed sheriff decided to examine all cold cases to determine if any warranted reopening. Mark's file was pulled from storage, evidence was checked for preservation condition, and witness statements were reread. However, all the data remained as fragmented as before: no body, no signs of a crime, no suspects. Efforts to research the Lake Sakakawea area that year also could not be carried out due to limited budget and the absence of any new indicators suggesting additional searches were needed. The only note recorded in the review minutes was no new evidence to justify reopening the investigation. By 1993, when some advances in trace evidence analysis technology were being applied in larger counties, the sheriff's office once again reviewed long-term missing persons cases to explore opportunities to utilize new technology. However, Williams County still lacked a modern forensics lab and had to rely on state-level agencies. When Mark's file was sent for evaluation of evidence analysis potential, the response was quite clear: the crumpled map was too degraded to extract complete fingerprints. The metal cup retained no identifiable contact marks. The torn piece of paper lacked sufficient ink or characters for comparative analysis. The blue fabric fragment could not be traced because the fibers had deteriorated over time and no longer retained their original structure. Forensic technology in the early 1990s was not advanced enough to decode old evidence that had been heavily affected by environmental conditions and the passage of years. The third review, in 1999, took place after the Hanlon family submitted a formal request for re-evaluation upon hearing that some other states had begun applying DNA technology to old cases. However, the sheriff's office had to explain that no biological samples in Mark's case could be used for DNA extraction, as there was no blood, no hair, no soft tissue personal items, and all collected evidence contained no identifiable biological traces. The state crime lab confirmed this and stated, "The case does not fall into the high forensic value category, limiting the possibility of reopening based on current technology." Over the course of 2 decades, many key witnesses from the initial phase also left the state. The gas station attendant quit in 1988 and moved to Montana. The truck driver who had seen the black SUV passed away in 1992. Delilah Rowe, whose statement had once suggested tension within the Hanlon family, moved to Minnesota in 1995 and ceased all contact with the sheriff's office. The disappearance or dispersal of witnesses made the file increasingly difficult to reconstruct in any systematic way. Additionally, the technological limitations of forensics at the time remained the biggest barrier. Fingerprints could not be recovered from the map due to ink and paper degradation. Fabric fibers could not be analyzed using advanced microscopic techniques that became available later. DNA could not be retrieved from the surface of the metal cup because the technology was not sophisticated enough, and handwriting on the torn paper could not be reconstructed because spectroscopic imaging methods were not yet common at local facilities. All analysis reports reached the same general conclusion: the evidence lacked sufficient value to expand the investigation using then-current technology. For 27 years, Mark Hanlon's file sat on the cold case shelf as a case with no direction, no breakthrough, and no new leads for progress. Each review only confirmed the prolonged deadlock: no body, no evidence of crime, no clear suspect, no forensic tools powerful enough to break through the blank wall that had covered Mark's traces on that winter night in 1981. And because of those limitations, the file remained closed year after year, lying quietly among dozens of other cold cases, an unsolved missing person case with no resolution, no opening, and no change for nearly 3 decades. Nearly 3 decades after Mark Hanlon's file was closed, the summer of 2009 marked an unexpected turning point when a construction crew hired to expand a dirt road south of Lake Sakakawea discovered an unusual structure beneath the eroded soil layer. While operating a bulldozer to level the road base, a worker spotted something protruding under the bucket, initially thinking it was a rotten log, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was a long bone segment with a shape consistent with human bone. The crew immediately stopped work and reported it to the site manager, who promptly notified the Williams County Sheriff's Office. When deputies arrived, they secured the area, instructed the workers to leave the scene undisturbed, and began determining whether the bone was human or animal. Preliminary forensic technicians confirmed the bone's characteristics: length, curvature, and epiphyseal structure were consistent with an adult human bone. As they expanded the excavation area, they found additional bone fragments scattered throughout the layer of soil eroded over years by wind and water. A deteriorated high-top work boot, with cracked leather and a nearly detached sole, appeared about 3 meters from the bone location. Though deformed, its distinctive lacing pattern suggested it resembled the type of winter work boots Mark was described as wearing in the 1981 file. Not far from the boot, searchers discovered a dark-colored cloth scarf with a remaining edge bearing a simply embroidered letter M that was still recognizable because the thread was more durable than the rest of the fabric. This initial matched the first letter of Mark's name, leading to its immediate collection as evidence. Digging about 2 meters deeper toward the southwest, the forensic team uncovered a decayed section of rope, fibers frayed but still structured enough to show it had once been knotted. The presence of rope near the skeletal remains drew particular attention from the sheriff, as no witness statement in the 1981 file mentioned Mark carrying any rope when he left home. All evidence, bones, boot, scarf, rope, was collected according to 2009 modern protocols, carefully placed in specialized bags, and transported to the North Dakota State Forensic Lab for further evaluation. When the data collection team marked GPS coordinates at the bone discovery site, another surprise emerged. The location was less than 2 miles, as the crow flies from where Mark's F-150 had been found in 1981, and lay precisely along the southwest direction. The very direction search teams had suspected Mark might have walked, but could not confirm because wind and snow had erased all traces. The discovery of human remains in an area directly related to the vehicle's discovery site immediately created a strong connection to the 1981 disappearance. After 27 years without progress, this was the first lead of decisive significance. The sheriff promptly compared the 1981 crime scene map with the 2009 road construction location, noting that the bone discovery point lay exactly on the old trail route that the blizzard had completely altered at the time, making it unrecognizable to the original search team. This greatly strengthened the likelihood that the remains belonged to Mark over any other possibility. That same afternoon, the sheriff sent an urgent report to the county prosecutor's office requesting the official reopening of Mark Hanlon's file and reclassification from missing, unknown circumstances to death suspected, undetermined cause. In parallel with the scene report, an internal notice was issued to retrieve all original evidence from storage and prepare it for reanalysis using modern technology to compare with the new findings. The reopening report explicitly stated that the discovery of human remains along with personal items suspected to be connected to Mark Hanlon at a location directly linked to the 1981 vehicle discovery area provided sufficiently strong grounds to consider this no longer an undetermined missing person case, but rather a death with indicators of abnormality, highly likely influenced by external force. That same day, the skeletal remains and all evidence collected near Lake Sakakawea were transferred directly to the North Dakota State Forensic Laboratory, marking the first time in nearly 30 years that Mark Hanlon's case was subjected to modern forensic science. There, forensic experts began the identification process using mtDNA analysis, a method particularly suitable for long-decomposed bone samples. A sample was drilled from the femur, where high bone density helps preserve DNA longer. Comparison of the mtDNA with reference samples from Mark's maternal relatives provided by the family in 1981 showed a complete match along the maternal line, confirming the skeleton was that of Mark Hanlon. This was the first irrefutable identification evidence, putting an end to any doubt about the identity of the remains. After identification, experts moved on to assessing damage to the skull. The skull was found relatively intact, though with some cracking due to long-term environmental exposure. However, on the right rear portion of the skull, there was a fracture distinct from environmentally caused cracks. Under microscopy, they determined this fracture had sharp edges and radiated in a fan-like pattern, consistent with trauma from direct force applied to the skull while the victim was alive or at the moment of death. This fracture showed no signs of uniform long-term erosion like secondary cracks, indicating it was a perimortem or antemortem injury rather than post-mortem. This was a critical finding, as it suggested Mark sustained severe blunt force trauma to the head prior to death. The experts continued analyzing the state of skeletal decomposition to determine the circumstances of Mark's death. The bones showed decomposition patterns consistent with burial in mineral-rich soil, near a water source, and exposure to cold winds over many years. No signs of significant animal scavenging, dragging, or heavy gnawing were found, ruling out death in a more remote forested area where wildlife activity is intense. However, minor scratch marks were present along the ribs and pelvis, consistent with the body lying in an area subject to seasonal minor water overflow or partial soil slippage, but without causing major postmortem damage. This indicated the body most likely remained at or near the discovery site from the time of death, without significant movement or dragging by natural forces. Decomposition patterns peri and postmortem were compared across bones at different depths, showing consistency in breakdown timeline, reinforcing the hypothesis that the body was not hastily buried and later dug up by animals, but rather gradually eroded by nature over a long period. Analysis continued with the decayed rope found near the skeleton. Though heavily rotted and frayed, forensic experts identified an incomplete knot resembling a quick-tie fixed knot. This raised the question of whether Mark may have been bound or dragged by the rope at the time of the incident. However, the rope's extensive deterioration prevented a definitive determination of its intended use. Additionally, the work boot discovered near the skeleton showed characteristic wear on the sole edge, a detail matching descriptions from Mark's co-workers about his walking pattern on job sites. This further strengthened the connection between the evidence and the deceased, while ruling out the possibility that the skeleton belonged to someone else who happened to die in the area. Next, the experts evaluated cause of death. By analyzing the shape, direction, and extent of the skull fracture radiation, they determined the force applied to the head was direct, not the result of a natural low-height fall. If Mark had fallen to the ground or slipped down a slope, the trauma pattern would have been different and typically involved multiple smaller contact points. Instead, the fracture structure showed concentrated force at a single point, producing a fan-like radiation reaction. Comparative analysis indicated this injury was compatible with an object having a narrow contact surface, such as a wooden club, metal pipe, or sharp edge of a hard tool. The experts also considered the possibility that Mark died of hypothermia after being injured. Though no soft tissue remained to determine body temperature or hypothermic state, the bone evidence showed he was struck hard before death, rather than dying naturally and then being affected by animals or the environment. Combining all factors, the skull fracture, consistent decomposition, skeletal location, matching the direction from the vehicle, and the presence of rope, the forensic team concluded that Mark died as a result of significant external force applied to the head, and that there were no indications the death was due to a simple accident. This was the most significant forensic conclusion since 1981, the first to confirm that Mark's disappearance was not a random event during a blizzard night, but the result of an act involving violence. These findings were returned to the sheriff's office with an official report, opening an entirely new investigative direction after nearly 3 decades of silence. The evidence collected in 1981 was transferred from storage to the Modern Analysis Lab in 2009, immediately after the skeletal identity was confirmed, marking the first time it was examined with forensic technology powerful enough to extract details previously overlooked. The blue fabric fragment, evidence #5, was prioritized for analysis first. Under scanning electron microscopy, the fiber structure revealed a synthetic cotton blend with a higher cotton proportion. This fiber type was consistent with late 1970s to early 1980s work jackets, often used in dark-colored lined models. However, Elaine had described Mark as wearing a brown jacket on the night he disappeared, raising questions about the fabric's origin. Deeper structural analysis showed the fibers exhibited fraying characteristic of clothing that had been forcefully pulled, consistent with friction during a struggle or impact. Soil residue on the fragment was compared to soil samples from the 2009 skeletal discovery site and showed high similarity in mineral content and clay ratio, reinforcing the likelihood that the fabric was present in the nearby area at the time of Mark's death. Although the fragment did not perfectly match the clothing Mark wore on the night of December 18, 1981, the 2009 analysis showed it could not have been wind-blown from a distant location, but must have been present near Mark's path before his body decomposed, making it an indirect but significant piece of evidence in establishing the context of death. The crumpled map, evidence #2, was reanalyzed using faint mark reconstruction techniques. Employing low-angle reflected light combined with image enhancement, experts discovered 2 previously faded markings on the map, an X near the southwest turn area, precisely indicating the direction toward Lake Sakakawea, and a heavy line drawn along an abandoned trail segment that the 1981 search team had not considered viable. This matched both the vehicle's discovery direction and the skeletal location, suggesting Mark may have marked this route before leaving home or while reviewing the map in the truck. Additionally, the map's fold patterns allowed identification of the area Mark opened most frequently, exactly the location where his remains were found. This detail had never been evaluated in 1981 because the technology at the time could not determine preferential fold areas. Thus, the map, previously regarded as disconnected evidence, became powerful proof that Mark had considered or planned movement toward the southwest, directly contradicting Elaine's statement that he was only going to check the western barn. The torn paper fragment, evidence #4, was examined using cellulose fiber analysis and paper edge matching techniques. When compared with paper samples taken from notebooks in the Hanlon home, experts found near-perfect similarity in fiber structure, cellulose density, and cut pattern. This indicated the fragment was very likely torn from a notebook in Mark's home, not a random item that ended up in the vehicle. Analysis of remaining ink showed it was a common ballpoint ink from the late 1970s. Image enhancement revealed partial characters. The first was S or 5, the second had a curved shape, possibly E, C, or G. The characters were insufficient to form a complete word, but confirming the paper's origin increased its value. Mark had written on or torn this paper shortly before leaving home, or while sitting in the vehicle. Since the fragment was found under the floor mat with soil dust, consistent with the vehicle's stopped position, experts concluded it was present in the truck at the time of the incident and was not planted later by someone else. After analyzing each piece of evidence, the forensic lab reconstructed their collective value systematically. Blue fabric fragment, though not part of Mark's clothing, its origin and soil residue matched the discovery site, supporting the hypothesis of a second person's presence in the area or prior contact with Mark. Crumpled map demonstrated Mark had considered and marked the southwest direction, matching the vehicle's path and remains location, directly contradicting Elaine's claim that he was only checking the western barn. Torn paper fragment confirmed Mark had engaged in note-taking or preparation before leaving home, suggesting possible intentions beyond simply checking the barn. Metal cup and pocket calendar contained no new data but served as baseline evidence, confirming Mark carried familiar items, indicating normal behavior prior to the incident. When combining all evidence, experts realized they were no longer as disjointed as in the 1981 assessment. The blue fabric suggested a second person's involvement, the map revealed intent to change direction, the torn paper hinted at an unknown plan, and the remains location aligned with the map markings. Together, these elements formed a far more cohesive picture than the original file. Mark's final journey was not a random path erased by a blizzard, but a purposeful one, leading to the area where his remains were found, and potentially directly involving the presence of another person. The conclusions from the 2009 reanalysis of old evidence were returned to the sheriff's office, accompanied by an assessment that the items once considered fragmented had now become crucial pieces for reconstructing the night Mark Hanlon disappeared, and could potentially open a path to identifying the person responsible for his death. Immediately after completing the analysis of the old and new evidence, the forensic team moved on to evaluating the soil, adhering to the work boot found near Mark's skeletal remains. A modern forensic method from 2009 that allows determination of the degree of geological match between the death scene and the location where the body was discovered. Although the boot was heavily deteriorated after many years exposed to the elements, it still retained a layer of fine soil deeply embedded in the tread grooves and cracked leather areas. Technicians used soft brushes, tweezers, and a micro-vacuum to collect all remaining soil samples without damaging the original material. The soil samples were separated into two groups, coarse-grained and fine-grained, then subjected to chemical composition analysis using X-ray fluorescence spectrometry. The results showed that the soil on Mark's boot had a high proportion of montmorillonite, a clay mineral characteristic of the southern area of Lake Sakakawea, combined with small amounts of calcium carbonate and microcrystals of dolomite, commonly found in the soil bands along the edges of wind hollows. When compared with soil samples collected directly beneath and around the skeletal position in 2009, the analysis revealed a strong match in both mineral composition and layering ratios. The two soil samples were nearly identical, allowing the determination that the boot had come into contact with the exact area where the body was found, rather than being carried there later by wind or animals. This finding was extremely significant because in 1981, the search team had covered a wide area but lacked the capability to identify such subtle geological details. In 2009, soil forensics technology made it possible to eliminate many previously proposed sources of error. The analysis also showed that the soil embedded in the boot's tread consisted of multiple superimposed layers. The bottom layer was dry, fine, grayish-brown soil. The middle layer had a high clay mineral content, and the top layer showed signs of cyclic water mixing due to seasonal thawing. This layered structure was consistent with Mark moving across the ground and dying on the spot before the weather shifted into repeated seasonal freeze-thaw cycles over decades. If the body had been transported a long distance before complete decomposition, the soil inside the boot would have shown mixing from multiple different areas, particularly the presence of iron-rich red soil from northern bands or black alluvial soil from the southeast. But no such foreign minerals were present in the analysis. This effectively ruled out almost entirely the possibility that the body had been brought to the area after death. Experts continued analyzing the soil adhering to the boot sole to determine the degree of compaction. Fine soil particles were compressed into flat bands at the sole edges, a clear sign that the wearer had stood, knelt, or fallen at that very spot, while the soil was still soft enough to retain pressure. If the boot had been dropped or placed there later, the compacted soil structure would have been different and would not have formed neat, flat layers conforming to the sole shape. This further reinforced that Mark was alive and present at that location at the moment of the incident. Additionally, soil samples from the deteriorated rope found near the body were compared and showed characteristics matching the soil stuck to the boot. This indicated that the rope was not blown there by wind or discarded randomly, but may have been present at the time of Mark's death, although its role could not yet be determined. In the comprehensive report submitted to the sheriff's office, the forensic team concluded the soil adhering to the boot fully matches the soil at the body recovery site. There is no geological evidence indicating significant post-mortem movement of the body or evidence. It is highly likely the victim died at the location. This conclusion had a major impact on the direction of the investigation. For many years, the hypothesis that Mark had an accident elsewhere and was later dragged to the lakeside area by wind or animals had been suggested to explain why the 1981 search team found nothing. But the 2009 soil forensics analysis completely eliminated that scenario, shifting the case toward an entirely new determination. Mark had died right at the location where the skeleton was found, meaning he had actively traveled to that point or been brought there while still alive. Moreover, the fact that the death location precisely matched the X mark on Mark's crumpled map further heightened suspicion that his journey on the night he disappeared was not random, but may have been directed, or that someone had led him there. And in that desolate area, Mark had encountered external force leading to his death. The final geological conclusion was entered into the 2009 supplemental file as follows. Location of death: the exact site where the skeletal remains were discovered. No evidence of post-mortem movement. The victim died at the scene prior to natural decomposition processes. This became one of the key pieces that transformed Mark Hanlon's case file from an unsolved missing person to a death with indicators of criminality. The first time in nearly 30 years that the case had sufficiently strong scientific grounds to be considered as a potential homicide. Based on all the new forensic data obtained in 2009, combined with timeline version 3 from 1981, the weather conditions on the night of December 18th, and the coordinates of the body discovery site, the sheriff's office together with the North Dakota State Analysis Team proceeded to reconstruct the final sequence of events in Mark Hanlon's last journey, with the goal of determining how he left the vehicle, moved to the death site, the timing of the injury, and the possible presence of a second person. First, the investigative team cross-referenced the weather conditions on the night of December 18, 1981, from historical meteorological records. Temperatures ranging from 17 degrees Celsius to 21 degrees Celsius, northwest winds of 30, 40 miles per hour. Heavy snow in bursts with gusts, visibility dropping below 40 meters at many points. Under such conditions, any healthy adult walking outdoors without proper protection would begin to experience hypothermia after 40-60 minutes. Mark left home at 8:45 p.m. The vehicle was found with no signs of attempted restart, no tire spin marks, or evidence of being stuck. This indicated that Mark had intentionally stopped the vehicle or had been forced to stop. According to forensic evidence, there was no blood or signs of struggle inside the vehicle, proving the injury occurred after Mark exited the car. The straight-line distance between the vehicle location and the body discovery site was less than 2 miles. In deep snow and strong winds, Mark could have taken 35-50 minutes to walk this distance if moving on his own. However, soil forensics showed that Mark fell at the discovery site without being dragged or moved post-mortem, meaning the journey from the vehicle to that point was direct and without body transport. Cranial forensics determined that Mark suffered a powerful external impact to the right side of his head, causing near-fatal trauma. The fan-shaped fracture pattern and sharp edges indicated an object with a small contact surface, most likely a long, hard object, such as a wooden club, metal pipe, or tool handle. The absence of additional bone injuries suggested Mark was not struck multiple times or crushed by a heavy object after death. This was consistent with a single, sudden, rapid attack. The crumpled map bore an X mark near the body discovery site, indicating Mark had considered or planned for this area before leaving home or while still in the vehicle. The torn piece of paper, possibly related to notes made before Mark left, confirmed he had reason to head toward that area. However, forensic evidence showed Mark was not carrying a flashlight, tools, or supplies prepared for a long trip. This led the analysis team to conclude that Mark did not independently plan to go there under blizzard conditions, unless he had been lured or compelled to leave. At this point, the event model began to take shape. Mark left home around 8:45 p.m., heading southwest, stopped the vehicle in darkness near the area of the old trail, exited the vehicle in strong winds and sub-zero temperatures. A second person may have been present near the vehicle or accompanied Mark for part of the subsequent journey. The position of the skeleton and the soil layering on the boot indicated Mark had stood at that spot before falling, rather than being pushed or dragged, meaning the two individuals may have stood facing each other at close range. Based on the extent of the cranial fracture, forensics calculated the impact force, concluding the blow occurred at a distance of 0.51 meter, directed from right to left and from above downward, allowing estimation of the perpetrator's position slightly behind or to the right of Mark. Given the terrain, a low mound at the edge of a wind hollow, the perpetrator most likely stood on ground 20-40 centimeters higher than Mark's position, making the force direction consistent with the fracture pattern. The analysis team further incorporated wind data between 9:15 and 9:45 p.m. Strong northwest winds were blowing, meaning any footprints in open areas would have been quickly erased, consistent with the 1981 search team finding no traces the next morning. From this, the timeline was reconstructed. Mark left home 8:45 p.m., arrived near the vehicle discovery area around 9 o'clock. 9:10 p.m. stopped the vehicle voluntarily or in response to a signal from another person, exited the vehicle, and walked southwest approximately 9:10. 9:25 p.m. encountered the second person at the later body discovery site. Brief conversation or confrontation occurred. Mark was struck once in the skull around 9:20, 9:30 p.m., fell and lost consciousness, immediate died from skull trauma, combined with hypothermia within minutes to tens of minutes. Notably, the death location exactly matched the X mark on the map. If Mark placed the mark himself, it means he intended to go there, suggesting a prearranged meeting. If someone else marked it, Mark's journey may have been guided. Experts continued analyzing the possibility that Mark tried to flee or resist, but the absence of defensive injuries to the arm bones or fractured hand bones indicated the blow was unexpected from behind or while Mark was unable to react. This fit the model of the perpetrator approaching from Mark's right, standing on higher ground, and attacking while Mark's vision was obscured by wind, snow, or darkness. The analysis team calculated the distance between the vehicle and death site along with wind direction, concluding Mark was almost certainly unable to hear or see the perpetrator approaching from the southwest due to the wind drowning out nearby sounds. This made a surprise blow highly feasible. Based on this information, the event model was reconstructed in 3D map form, showing Mark leaving the vehicle, wind direction, movement path, terrain elevation, and possible perpetrator position within a 1-2 meter radius around the skeletal discovery point. In the model, Mark and the second person stood facing each other along a northeast-southwest axis, with the perpetrator positioned slightly to Mark's right, and wind blowing from northwest to southeast, exactly matching the storm wind direction on the night of December 18, 1981. This model was entered into the official file as the event reconstruction conclusion, the first time indicating that Mark died as a result of violent action by another person at the precise location where the body was found, not due to accident, not self-fall, not getting lost, but as the victim of a fatal blow in extreme weather conditions, occurring within the time frame when 1981 witnesses still reported seeing a suspicious black SUV in the vicinity of his journey. After the event reconstruction model for the night of December 18, 1981, was completed with forensic support, meteorological data, and death site analysis, the sheriff's office proceeded to the next step, cross-referencing all statements provided by Elaine Hanlon in 1981 with the 2009 scientific data chain to determine accuracy, potential errors, and points that could not logically align. In her original statement, Elaine asserted that Mark left home heading toward the western barn, a short, familiar route completely unrelated to the southwest direction where the vehicle was found and near the death area. The 2009 map analysis showed the barn location significantly northwest, far from the road leading down to Lake Sacagawea. If Mark had truly gone west, he could not have ended up in the southwest area where the vehicle was discovered, much less reached the death site nearly 2 miles away in a straight line. This was the largest contradiction, as Elaine's statement directly contradicted the actual path Mark traveled. Next, Elaine stated that Mark did not take a map, papers, or unusual items when leaving home. Yet 2009 forensics proved the map in the vehicle had been opened multiple times, contained an X mark exactly at the body discovery site, and the torn paper fragment in the vehicle originated from a notebook in the Hanlon home. This showed Mark had prepared items before leaving, preparation that Elaine claimed never happened. This was the second major contradiction. Mark exhibited preparatory behavior for a more deliberate, longer journey, while Elaine insisted he was only going to check the barn for a few minutes. Regarding timing, Elaine said Mark left home at 8:45 p.m. The 2009 timeline confirmed Mark left the gas station around 6 p.m., giving him enough time to eat dinner and rest, but the actual journey taking the vehicle to the southwest area around 9 o'clock. 9:10 p.m. contradicted the stated purpose of checking the barn, since according to her statement, the barn was only minutes away by car. If Elaine was correct, Mark should have returned within 10-15 minutes. There was no reason for him to be absent for hours before Elaine reported him missing at 2:19 a.m. This was the third major contradiction. The time Mark left home and the time he disappeared completely did not match the activity, Elaine described. Elaine's statement also included details about Mark's clothing: brown jacket, gray wool scarf, old work boots. However, 2009 forensics recovered a boot, matching the description, and discovered a scarf with an M at the body site, contradicting her claim that Mark did not wear a scarf with embroidered initials or anything personally marked that night. If the M scarf belonged to Mark, Elaine was incorrect in describing his attire. If it did not belong to him, its presence next to the skeleton raised the possibility of a second person, yet Elaine denied any outside contact that evening. This was the fourth contradiction. Physical evidence suggested either Mark carried a marked scarf or encountered someone with such a scarf. Neither scenario fit Elaine's statement. Regarding the black SUV, reported by the gas station attendant and truck driver, Elaine stated there were no strange vehicles around the house that night. But 2009 forensics and path modeling showed Mark leaving the station, followed by a strange SUV in the same direction toward the lake, possibly to the vehicle discovery area. Elaine's denial of any unfamiliar vehicles made her statement highly questionable, especially since independent witness accounts aligned. This was the fifth contradiction. Additionally, Elaine said Mark took his usual shoes, jacket, and pocket calendar, mentioning nothing about notes or unusual exchanges. Yet 2009 forensics showed the torn paper came from the home notebook, had faint characters, and was found inside Mark's vehicle. While the content could not be determined, Elaine's failure to mention any note-taking behavior was the sixth contradiction. Since if Mark wrote something important right before leaving, Elaine would likely have known. Another noteworthy point was Elaine's assertion that there was no tension between the couple that evening. However, the 1981 statement from employee Delilah Rowe indicated prolonged financial disagreements between Mark and Elaine, and 2009 forensic analysis showed Mark's preparatory behavior, which Elaine either overlooked or deliberately concealed. This was the seventh contradiction, motive or context, that Elaine completely denied. Finally, forensics determined Mark did not die from cold, but from powerful external force to the head, at the exact body discovery site. Yet Elaine described Mark as merely going to check the barn, implying she believed he had not gone far and was not in danger. This completely contradicted the forensic reality. The eighth and most significant contradiction, Elaine portrayed Mark's journey as a short, harmless activity. Forensics proved it led to death by violent impact. When summarized, the sheriff's office recognized that all the most serious discrepancies in the file stemmed from a single source, Elaine's statements that formed the basis for the entire misguided search direction in 1981. These contradictions included direction of travel, purpose for leaving home, items Mark carried, timing of departure, presence of unfamiliar vehicles, and pre-departure preparatory behavior. With the 2009 data, Elaine became the individual with the greatest level of inconsistency in the entire file, and the only person whose information failed to match any actual data obtained from forensics, witnesses, or the body location. After completing the comparison of Elaine's statements and determining she was the only individual with major contradictions to the entire 2009 forensic dataset, the sheriff's office decided to re-interview all witnesses who had appeared in the 1981 file. Among them, Delilah Rowe, the former employee of the Hanlon family, was considered a witness who might provide information previously overlooked or not given sufficient weight. Delilah had moved to Minnesota in the mid-1990s, but after being contacted, she agreed to return to Williston to provide a new statement. During the 2009 interview, Delilah was noticeably more reserved than in 1981. She explained that back then she had only provided information about Mark's mental state and the family's financial tensions, as she did not want to disrupt Elaine's life after Mark's disappearance. However, upon being informed that the skeleton had been found and forensics concluded Mark died from external force, Delilah said the time had come to reveal what she had kept silent about for many years. According to Delilah, approximately 2 days after Mark disappeared, Elaine called her to the house late in the evening, saying she needed to get rid of some old things. Delilah described Elaine as appearing tense, sleepless, and constantly looking out the window. Elaine brought out from the garage a thick black cloth bag, not one Mark usually used, and asked Delilah to take it to the land behind the old barn to burn, stating she didn't want anyone rummaging through Mark's leftover junk. At the time, Delilah did not suspect much, but still asked, "Is there anything important in there?" Elaine only replied, "No, just old and torn stuff, things Mark left behind." The bag was quite heavy, unlike one containing light clothing. Delilah said that when she opened the bag before burning it, she saw several dark-colored fabric pieces, a torn portion of a jacket, and what looked like an old, loosely coiled rope. She clearly remembered a dark blue-green fabric balled up, with blended cotton fibers and somewhat coarse hand stitching. She did not know why Elaine wanted to burn them, but Elaine was extremely urgent and did not want to keep them in the house. Delilah completed the burning as requested, but due to strong winds, some light fabric pieces were blown away before fully burning. She thought no one would care and did not pick them up. When the 2009 investigators heard this detail, they immediately cross-referenced it with evidence #5, the green fabric fragment found near Mark's vehicle in 1981. Prior forensic analysis had concluded that the green fabric contained blended cotton synthetic fibers, showed tearing, fraying, and soil minerals matching samples from the body site. When Delilah was shown enlarged photographs of the fabric from the evidence file, she stated the color and fiber type were exactly the same as the fabric piece in the bag Elaine had asked her to burn nearly 30 years earlier. To verify reliability, forensics conducted comparative fiber structure analysis. The evidence fabric featured over 60% cotton fibers, with the remainder being round-profile polyester synthetic fibers, a type rare in women's clothing, but common in men's work jackets or protective gear of that era. Delilah confirmed the bag contained a torn portion of a jacket, though she did not know whose it was. This was the first time a 1981 piece of evidence could be directly linked to witness testimony about Elaine's unusual handling of items. Behavior occurring just days after Mark's disappearance. Investigators recorded this connection as a breakthrough. The fabric was no longer an isolated piece of evidence, but now had witness data describing Elaine's attempt to destroy material identical in color, composition, and condition. When cross-referenced with timing, Delilah clearly pinpointed the burning as occurring after the initial wide-area search phase ended, but before the sheriff announced the closure of active operations in 1981. This placed Elaine's behavior squarely in the suspicious time frame. She was at home, not participating in the search, and actively disposing of unusual items. Investigators also compared Delilah's statement with the 2009 analysis of the deteriorated rope. The rope fibers Delilah saw in the bag were lighter in color because they hadn't rotted as much. Forensics confirmed the rope at the death scene had twisted fiber structure and thickness comparable to the type commonly used on farms, the same type the Hanlon household had used. Although it could not be proven definitively that the two ropes were identical, the coincidence in description, location, and disposal behavior made the connection highly noteworthy. Finally, for the first time in 28 years, the case file gained a crucial link: physical evidence witnessed testimony's suspicious behavior by Elaine. Delilah said, "I didn't dare think too much back then, but now knowing Mark was killed, I think Elaine was trying to hide something. I don't know what else was in the bag, but she was adamant it had to be burned that very night." This new testimony opened the first logical connection between 1981 evidence and human behavior, a connection that had remained unidentified for decades due to the lack of forensic technology and the absence of witnesses willing to speak out. After the new statement from Delilah Rowe shed light on the possibility that Elaine had intentionally destroyed evidence related to Mark's disappearance, the sheriff's office moved to the next step, analyzing motive, a factor that could not be established in 1981 due to the absence of a body, lack of forensic data, and no behavioral evidence. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, motive was examined in a much fuller context, with the ability to cross-reference financial records, insurance files, and the Hanlon family's marriage documentation. Starting with the 1981 financial picture, the investigative team reconstructed the family's cash flow by collecting bank statements, local store credit ledgers, farm supply invoices, and the construction deposit records that Mark and Elaine had used. From this, they determined that Mark was the primary income earner, while Elaine managed household spending. However, Copies of the 1981 Williston Cooperative Credit Ledger showed that Elaine had accumulated numerous non-essential purchases that Mark had not recorded in his personal notebook. Cross-referencing invoices revealed that some of these entries were written in Elaine's handwriting, distinct from Mark's. This suggested underlying financial tension, consistent with Delilah's testimony about Mark's complaints regarding Elaine's excessive spending. A deeper review of financial records archived by the local bank revealed that Elaine had applied for a small loan in early December 1981, but was denied due to insufficient independent collateral. At that time, Elaine could not demonstrate separate income because the vast majority of the family's revenue came from Mark. While this detail does not prove direct motive, it demonstrated that Elaine was under financial pressure shortly before Mark disappeared. The most significant element in the motive analysis concerned life insurance records. When pulling data from Western Continental Insurance in 1981, the team discovered that Mark had a life insurance policy valued at $50,000, a reasonable amount for a small family farm. However, an addendum in the file showed that in August 1981, Elaine had submitted a request to change the beneficiary from the Hanlon family to Elaine Hanlon, sole beneficiary. The change form was signed by Mark according to the records, but 2009 handwriting forensics revealed unusual characteristics in the signature, uneven, extended final strokes that differed from Mark's signature on contemporaneous banking documents. While not conclusively declaring the signature forged, the handwriting expert noted, "This is a signature that does not fully reflect the stable characteristics present in Mark's exemplar signatures." Even more noteworthy, 1 month later, in September 1981, Elaine submitted another application to increase the policy limit to $100,000. The request was not approved because it required a medical examination, an examination Mark never underwent. This helped clarify that Elaine had actively pursued increasing Mark's insurance coverage in the months immediately preceding his disappearance. Further cross-checking with data from Fargo Mutual Insurance revealed that Elaine had also requested premium quotes for additional coverage, though the file was left incomplete. Individually, each small detail could be seen as ordinary financial behavior, but when placed within the 2009 sequence of events, they became critical pieces establishing motive. The investigative team then turned to the marital aspect. The newly resurfaced 2009 statement from Mark's friend Harold Benson revealed that Mark had mentioned considering divorce. Mark had said he no longer trusted Elaine and wanted to protect the farm assets if anything happened. This was a detail Mark had never shared with his family, and in 1981 no one documented it because Mark had only mentioned it privately while drinking beer with his friend. Harold also provided information that Mark had consulted a local attorney in November 1981. Although the law office had long since closed, surviving notarial records showed an entry for a preliminary consultation under Mark Hanlon's name at exactly that time. No attached content existed because the consultation had not progressed to formal legal filing, but it confirmed that Mark had been contemplating legal action regarding his marriage. If Mark had intended to divorce, Elaine would have faced losing control over finances, the farm property, and any entitlement to Mark's life insurance proceeds, creating a clear intersection of financial and marital motive. The combined analyses led to the conclusion Elaine was under financial pressure before Mark's disappearance. She exhibited proactive behavior regarding Mark's life insurance just months before the event, and Mark was highly likely preparing for divorce proceedings, which, under the law at the time, would have disqualified Elaine as beneficiary. The overlap of marital discord, financial pressure, and direct economic benefit from Mark's death made the motive clearer than ever before. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, the case presented a logical set of elements: suspicious behavior, physical evidence, witness testimony, and a motive consistent with a pattern of violent crime, all placing Elaine Hanlon at the center of the investigative file. After completing the motive analysis, along with the physical evidence and additional statements, the sheriff's office entered the most critical phase, constructing a complete, unbroken chain of evidence. the logical framework connecting every piece of scattered 1981 data with the full forensic results of 2009. This step was essential to determine whether the file now met the legal threshold for an arrest warrant. The process began by reorganizing all evidence chronologically. Evidence from 1981 included the metal cup, crumpled map, pocket calendar, torn paper scrap, and blue fabric fragment. Evidence from 2009 included the work boots, hymn towel, decayed rope, and soil samples from the skeletal location. When aligned along timelines and spatial relationships, the evidence showed Mark's continuous journey from home vehicle place of death, with no interruptions and no signs of post-mortem body movement. The crumpled map bore an X mark precisely where the skeleton was found, indicating Mark had viewed or marked that location. The torn paper scrap proved preparatory or communicative behavior before Mark left the house, contradicting Elaine's claim that Mark was only going to check the livestock pens. Meanwhile, the blue fabric fragment recovered near the vehicle in 1981 matched Delilah's new testimony about the bag Elaine asked her to burn, a bag containing torn blue fabric, a jacket, and rope. This became the first witness evidence showing Elaine had deliberately attempted to destroy materials connected to the night Mark disappeared, consistent with the remaining evidence at the vehicle scene. Turning to forensics, 2009 soil forensics analysis proved that both the boots and rope contained soil matching the discovery site of the remains. This eliminated any hypothesis that Mark died elsewhere and was transported, confirming the skeletal location as the actual place of death. Skull forensics confirmed Mark suffered blunt force trauma, a deliberate blow producing a radial fracture pattern. Forensic analysis concluded this was not an accident or death from exposure, but an act of violence. When forensic pieces were placed into the timeline, the event model showed Mark left the vehicle around 9:10 p.m., walked in strong wind, and reached the death site between 9:20 and 9:30 p.m. Based on body position, skull fracture, and force direction, forensics determined the assailant stood to Mark's right on higher ground, striking downward, a pattern consistent with the terrain at the death site. From a timeline perspective, Elaine's statements became the largest point of contradiction. Elaine claimed Mark went only west, yet all evidence and forensics pointed southwest. Elaine said Mark did not take a map, but the map was in the vehicle, used, and matched the death location. Elaine said Mark had no new papers or items, but the torn scrap from the household notebook proved otherwise. Elaine said there were no strange vehicles around the house, but two independent witnesses confirmed a black SUV near the gas station around the time Mark left. Elaine denied marital tension, but legal records showed Mark had consulted about divorce. When all these elements were linked, the timeline became the central axis connecting forensics, physical evidence, and statements. 5:45, 6 p.m., Mark appears at the gas station. 6 o'clock, 6:10 p.m. Black SUV appears and follows Mark's direction. 8:45 p.m., Mark leaves home, according to Elaine, to check the livestock pens, but forensics prove he went in a different direction. Around 9 p.m., Mark stops the vehicle at the exact location marked on the map. 9:10, 9:25 p.m., Mark moves to the death site and encounters another person. 9:20, 9:30 p.m., death from a powerful blow to the head. 1981, 2009, physical evidence matches the journey, with no signs of body relocation. When witnesses were incorporated into this chain, Delilah's testimony became a crucial link. Elaine asked Delilah to burn a bag containing torn fabric, rope, and a jacket. Exactly the types of items forensics identified at the death scene. The burning occurred just days after Mark's disappearance, while search teams were still active and the case remained open. This constituted evidence tampering, something unknown until 2009. Cross-referencing motive, the financial and marital factors further clarified Elaine's role. Changing the insurance beneficiary, requesting an increase in coverage, loan denial, overspending, the risk of losing assets in a divorce, combined with Mark preparing for divorce proceedings. When the team linked forensics, physical evidence, timeline, witness statement, motive, evidence destruction behavior, a clear cause and effect chain emerged. Elaine had a clear financial motive. Mark was preparing for divorce, creating severe financial disadvantage for Elaine. Mark left home on a journey inconsistent with Elaine's account. Physical evidence proved Mark traveled southwest, not the direction Elaine described. Forensics confirmed Mark encountered another person and was attacked. Evidence near the vehicle matched items Elaine attempted to burn. Delilah's testimony confirmed concealment behavior. Forensics determined death by blunt force, not accident. No evidence suggested Mark sought his own death. The final logical chain was presented in the sheriff's conclusion report as follows. 1. Mark left home under circumstances Elaine misrepresented. 2. Mark was lured or proceeded to the death site, according to the marked map. 3. Mark encountered another person at that location. 4. Mark was attacked with a hard object and died on site. 5. Elaine subsequently attempted to destroy related items. 6. Elaine had a clear financial marital motive. 7. No other suspect had comparable motive or alternative behavior. With this chain of evidence, investigators determined the file now met both legal and practical requirements for an arrest warrant. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the Mark Hanlon case possessed a complete, consistent, and court-viable evidentiary structure. Once the chain of evidence was finalized and deemed strong enough to withstand prosecutorial scrutiny, the Williams County Sheriff's Office immediately transferred the entire file to the prosecutor's office to prepare for Elaine Hanlon's arrest warrant. The summary submitted to the court included the core elements: forensic conclusion of death by blunt force trauma, confirmation that the body was not moved post-mortem, linkage of 1981 physical evidence to Delilah Rose's new statement, event model indicating Mark was led to the death site, and Elaine's financial marital motive. The District Court No. 3 judge reviewed the file in a closed hearing, questioning the continuity of the evidence chain, the ability to exclude other suspects, and the reliability of the forensics. The prosecution responded by presenting each piece of evidence in detail, emphasizing that every element, from forensics, physical evidence, statements, to motive, converged on a single point. Elaine was the only person with opportunity, concealment behavior, and direct financial benefit from Mark's death. No element in the file remained consistent with Elaine's possible innocence. After nearly an hour of review, the judge signed the arrest warrant, accompanied by search warrants for Elaine's current residence and workplace. The warrant was time-stamped at 6:42 a.m., allowing immediate execution. By 2009, Elaine no longer lived in Williston. She had moved to Minot, approximately 110 kilometers east. The execution team was assembled that same afternoon, consisting of 4 Williams County investigators, 2 Mena police officers, and 1 state investigator for legal support. The arrest plan was designed for a small team to avoid drawing attention in Elaine's residential area. The task force determined that Elaine left home around 7:30 a.m. each day for her job at a small accounting office in downtown Mena. For safety, the team decided to execute the arrest at her home around 6:15 a.m., when Elaine was typically awake but had not yet left the neighborhood. Law enforcement approached the house at exactly 6:10 a.m., splitting into 2 groups, one at the front, one at the rear, to prevent escape. When the sheriff knocked and identified himself, Elaine opened the door in confusion, not understanding what was happening. The investigator read the warrant aloud. Elaine Hanlon, you are under arrest for the murder of Mark Hanlon on December 18, 1981, pursuant to the order of District Court No. 3, North Dakota. Elaine was silent for several seconds before saying, "This can't be, this ended a long time ago." Nevertheless, officers proceeded to handcuff her according to protocol and read her full Miranda rights. While one team escorted Elaine to the vehicle, the other conducted the search pursuant to the warrant, seizing personal documents including financial records, notebooks, copies of old insurance bills Elaine had retained, 2 boxes of archived papers she had brought from Williston to Mena, and several items potentially related to 1981 concealment efforts. A wooden cabinet in the bedroom was sealed and transported intact, because it contained documents that could not be sorted on site. Police also seized a small metal box containing numerous paper scraps, including cut fragments, possibly related to prior attempts to destroy Mark-related documents. The arrest was fully executed in 22 minutes without major disturbance to the neighborhood. As the police vehicle drove away from Menno, Elaine asked only one question. "Why, after all these years, are you coming for me now?" The investigator replied, "Because we finally have the answer to that night." And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, the sole suspect in Mark Hanlon's disappearance was officially taken into custody, supported by a complete, coherent chain of evidence bolstered by modern forensic science. At Elaine Hanlon's trial, the presentation by forensic experts became the centerpiece, proving the sequence of events leading to Mark Hanlon's death through modern forensic technology unavailable in 1981. The prosecution called 4 expert groups: the bone analysis team, determining cause of death; the soil forensics team, soil comparison; the fiber analysis team, blue fabric fragment; and the crime scene geometric reconstruction team, recreating the events of the night of December 18, 1981. The first forensic expert, Dr. Gerald Nyman, presented the cause of death conclusion. Based on skull evaluation, he pointed to a radial fracture pattern in the right rear region, a feature incompatible with a natural fall onto soft snow. He explained that the crack propagation pattern and sharp edges could only result from impact by a hard object with a small contact surface, such as a metal bar or tool handle. When asked whether the blow was the direct cause of death, Dr. Nyman affirmed, "Given the extent of fracturing and force applied, the victim either died instantly or lost consciousness and died very shortly thereafter due to traumatic brain injury compounded by extreme cold." He emphasized that no defensive injuries appeared on the bones, meaning the blow came from behind or from an angle Mark could not see. Next, soil forensics expert Dr. Marcia Holland presented the soil comparison between Mark's boots and the soil at the skeletal discovery site. She described sampling from boot tread grooves, mineral separation, and X-ray spectrum comparison. She confirmed near-perfect match, identical proportions of montmorillonite, dolomite, calcium carbonate, and organic content. When asked whether the body could have been moved to the site, Dr. Holland replied, "No. Soil layering in the boot soles shows Mark stood and fell exactly where the bones were found. Had someone transported the body later, the soil sample would show mixing or lack the characteristic compression from a living person standing." The jury noted this as the critical piece confirming the death location, essential for establishing that the assault occurred at the scene. The third group, led by fiber expert Dr. Robert Haskin, presented findings on the 1981 blue fabric fragment. Under scanning electron microscopy, he described its cotton polyester blend structure. Matching Delilah Rowe's description of fabric in the bag, Elaine asked her to burn. When asked whether the fragment could have blown to the vehicle area from elsewhere, Dr. Haskin countered, "Unlikely. Soil residue on the fabric matches the vehicle vicinity, and the fibers show tearing from strong pulling force, indicative of struggle or mechanical stress, not wind action." He also confirmed the fabric did not match Mark's clothing as described by Elaine, but was consistent with a male work jacket possibly worn by another person. This raised the possibility of a second individual, and when questioned, he stated, "The fabric fragment did not belong to Mark, but it did belong to someone present near the vehicle." The fourth expert, crime scene reconstruction engineer Dr. Lawrence Kramer, presented a 3D model recreating the events of December 18, 1981. Using topographic maps, wind data, elevation and distances between vehicle and death site, the full reconstruction showed Mark leaving the vehicle around 9:10 p.m., walking southwest in strong wind, completely contrary to Elaine's claim that he went west. He indicated the positions of victim and assailant approximately 1.2–1.5 meters apart, with the assailant standing on higher ground, producing a force direction consistent with the skull fracture. When asked whether the blow could have occurred while Mark was moving alone, Dr. Kramer replied, "No. Distance, force direction, and injury location indicate someone approached Mark from behind right. This cannot be an accident. He also presented the crumpled 1981 map, noting the X mark coincided exactly with the body location. When asked whether Mark could have marked the spot himself, Dr. Kramer stated, "Two possibilities. Mark marked it because he intended to meet someone, or someone else marked the map and placed it in the vehicle. Either way, it proves Mark was not wandering randomly." At the conclusion of the presentations, the prosecution asked all four expert groups to confirm a joint finding whether the forensic data ruled out accident and supported the presence of a perpetrator. All four agreed. The prosecution then asked each expert to rate the certainty of their conclusions. Dr. Nyman, near certainty of death by impact from another person.
Dr. Holland,
Certainty of death on site with no post-mortem relocation. Dr. Haskin, high probability the fabric belonged to a second person. Dr. Kramer, behavioral model inconsistent with natural movement. When the presentation ended, the prosecutor turned to the jury and said, "This scientific evidence did not exist in 1981, but today, it gives us the truth. Mark Hanlon was killed, and the only person present throughout the entire chain of evidence, from motive, statements, concealment behavior, to timeline inconsistencies, is Elaine Hanlon." The sound of pen scratching filled the courtroom, marking the moment the forensic chain became the central pillar of the trial. The first time in nearly 3 decades that modern forensic science spoke for the man who could no longer speak for himself. The trial moved into the closing phase as the prosecutor stood before the jury and began presenting the chain of evidence that they argued formed a complete logical system strong enough to convict Elaine Hanlon of killing her husband nearly 3 decades earlier. The prosecution emphasized that the case had long been considered an unsolved missing person, not because there was no crime, but because the technology of the time could not answer critical questions. In a calm but firm voice, the prosecutor listed each group of evidence. Forensic analysis of the skull confirmed Mark died from blunt force trauma by a hard object. Soil forensics proved Mark died exactly at the location where he was found and was never moved. Old physical evidence, the map, torn scrap of paper, blue fabric fragment, when analyzed with 2009 technology, revealed premeditation, direction of travel, and the presence of a second person. New testimony from Delilah Rowe showed Elaine deliberately destroyed items matching those recovered at the scene. And the financial motive, Elaine's marriage was clearly troubled when insurance records, bank accounts, and Mark's preparations for divorce were examined together. The prosecution not only pointed out the consistency among the elements, but also highlighted the clear contradictions in Elaine's statements. Wrong direction, wrong timing, wrong items, wrong description of clothing, denial of the presence of an unfamiliar vehicle, and concealment of the state of the marriage. These contradictions are not random, the prosecutor told the jury. They are attempts to conceal the truth, and only one person benefited from Mark Hanlon's death, Elaine Hanlon. After the prosecution's coherent presentation, the defense attorney rose to counter. They focused on 3 main points. Too much time had passed. Witness Delilah might be misremembering after nearly 30 years, and the blue fabric could not be 100% confirmed as belonging to someone connected to Elaine. The defense argued that memory degradation over decades could render the new testimony unreliable. The blue fabric could belong to anyone who had ever passed through that area. And while the forensic chain was strong, it did not specifically name Elaine as the killer. They tried to plant reasonable doubt in the jurors' minds, stressing the absence of direct eyewitnesses and the absence of the murder weapon, which left gaps in the case. She lost her husband, the defense attorney said. And now, nearly 30 years later, she is being accused based on incomplete data, rotting pieces of fabric, and faded memories. No one saw Elaine at the scene. No one heard an argument. No one saw her strike Mark. That is not the standard required to convict a person. However, the prosecution immediately responded in their final rebuttal. There was no direct witness on that blizzard night because the killer chose the exact moment when no one could see. But forensic science is Mark's voice. The blue fabric is not meaningless when a witness confirms Elaine burned similar items. Soil forensics does not cheerfully say otherwise. It states that Mark died right there, and every false statement came from one person, Elaine. When both sides concluded their arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. The courtroom fell silent, with only faint murmurs from the spectator benches, people who had followed the case from the shock of the body's discovery to the dense forensic chain. The deliberation lasted nearly 4 hours, longer than expected, showing the jury was carefully weighing the evidence. They had to decide whether the chain of evidence, even without direct eyewitnesses, formed a solid foundation for a criminal conviction. When the jury returned, the room was dead silent. The foreperson asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The jury foreperson stood, holding a sheet of paper. "We have." He unfolded it and read slowly, his voice steady, but clearly carrying the weight of the decision. "We find the defendant Elaine Hanlon guilty of murder in the second degree in the death of victim Mark Hanlon." Elaine bowed her head without saying a word. A few sharp gasps came from the back rows where Mark's family had sat through many days of trial. The prosecution maintained their composure, but the fact that the truth, sought for nearly 3 decades, had finally been recognized by the court brought unmistakable relief to their eyes. The defense attorney placed a hand on Elaine's shoulder, but she did not react. This verdict meant Elaine intentionally caused Mark's death, not necessarily premeditated murder, but an intentional act of violence that resulted in death. In the final moments of the hearing, the judge declared, "The court accepts the jury's verdict. Defendant Elaine Hanlon is found guilty of murder in the second degree. This concludes the trial." The gavel struck, echoing through the room where the truth, buried for nearly 30 years, had finally been restored, not by human memory, but by science, persistence, and pieces of evidence long thought useless. From the overall perspective of the nearly 3-decade investigation, the Mark Hanlon case has become a classic example of both the limitations of early traditional investigation and the undeniable power of modern forensic science in solving cold cases. The early period of 1981-1982 was marked by near-total deadlock, harsh weather, limited technology, and the investigative systems of the time made it impossible for authorities to distinguish between a voluntary disappearance and deliberate murder. The absence of a body, combined with a crime scene erased by blizzards, rendered every hypothesis insufficiently supported to pursue. The case quickly became a cold case due to the lack of criminal indicators and remained so through 3 subsequent reviews in 1986, 1993, and 1999. These reviews clearly revealed why the case went cold. Forensic technology was not yet strong enough to analyze scattered items like fabric fragments, crumpled maps, or torn paper. There were no biological samples for DNA comparison. Witnesses had moved out of state, memories had faded, and virtually all data had been eroded by time, environment, and the lack of modern storage systems. In 1981, no one could have imagined that the ground where the body was found, nearly 30 years later, lay within the original search radius, but was completely overlooked due to snow cover and the absence of positioning and terrain modeling technology. The case went cold, not only because of missing evidence, but also because of near-total reliance on Elaine's statements. Statements later proven fundamentally false, which sent the entire search in the wrong direction. Dependence on a single, unverified account was a major weakness of 1970s. 1980s investigations, and the Mark Hanlon case starkly illustrates the consequences. Only when modern forensic science entered the picture in 2009 did the entire picture finally fall into clear logical order. MET-DNA identified the skeletal remains, soil forensics determined the place of death and ruled out body movement. Fiber and histological analysis showed the blue fabric did not belong to Mark, but to someone else present at the scene. Low-angle light techniques revealed the true destination marked on the crumpled map. Event reconstruction models based on meteorological data, terrain and skull forensics rebuilt the final timeline. And Delilah's new testimony bridged the gap between physical evidence and human behavior. Something the 1981 file completely lacked. This is vivid proof of the game-changing role of modern forensics. Technology does not merely supplement investigation. In many cases, it is the only factor capable of recovering truth when witnesses and memories have vanished with time. Without soil forensics, no one could confirm Mark died on the spot. Without microstructure scanning of the skull, no one could determine the fatal blow. Without scene reconstruction modeling, no one would realize Mark was lured to the place of death. Without microfiber analysis, the blue fabric would still be considered irrelevant, and without angled light examination, the X mark on the map would have remained forever invisible. In that context, the Mark Hanlon case also had a profound impact on the Williston community and the wider state of North Dakota. For many residents who lived in the area throughout those 3 decades, resolving the disappearance was not only a legal matter, but also symbolic. A reminder that what time buries can still be recovered when technology, people, and investigative will come together at the right moment. The community also had to confront the reality that a case long thought to be no crime was actually a murder right in the heart of town, committed by a wife regarded as gentle and devoted. Elaine's arrest and conviction made many residents realize that truth is not always found in the initial story, and a seemingly peaceful marriage can hide undercurrents no one noticed. In terms of investigative practice, this file has become a textbook case in training future cold case investigators. The importance of preserving evidence even when it appears useless. The danger of over-reliance on a single statement. The need to periodically review cases because forensic technology evolves rapidly. And the lesson that a single small error, wrong direction, overlooked items, inanalyzed fabric, can stall an entire case for decades. Young investigators in North Dakota's cold case training programs after this trial are often presented with the Mark Hanlon file as the standard example. Not every cold case is unsolvable. Sometimes the answer has been in the evidence from day one, simply waiting for technology strong enough to read it. This case also led to improved procedures for periodic review of old evidence. Items are no longer deemed worthless simply because current technology cannot read them. Instead, they are stored long-term and placed on lists for reanalysis whenever new methods emerge. Ultimately, the Mark Hanlon file ends with a conclusion that is both cautionary and hopeful. Truth can be buried for a very long time, but it does not disappear, and in investigative work, persistence, objectivity, and faith in scientific progress can always lead to answers, even if those answers arrive 30 years late. Among American readers today, what resonates most powerfully in the entire Mark Hanlon file is not only the tragedy of a North Dakota family, but also the way a small community was challenged by decades of silence. Details such as Elaine giving false statements from the beginning, the 1981 investigators being forced to rely almost entirely on her account due to lack of technology, or Delilah Rowe remaining silent for years out of fear of disrupting others' lives. All reflect very human situations, still common in American society today. Many people still hesitate to speak up when they notice something wrong. Many families hide conflicts to avoid gossip, and many communities prefer the most believable version over the actual truth. This file reminds us that small things, a torn piece of fabric, a false detail about direction, or a bag secretly burned, can become crucial links if noticed at the right time. In modern American life, with ever-advancing forensic technology, digital data, and storage systems, every individual bears greater responsibility than ever to protect truth. Report suspicious behavior, record accurate information, and not dismiss seemingly trivial details. The story also serves as a reminder that domestic violence and financial conflicts can be skillfully concealed behind an appearance of stability. As with Mark preparing for divorce, while no one knew until the case was reopened. This is especially important in small American communities, where people often hesitate to intrude on others' privacy. Yet appropriate concern, vigilance, and a culture of speak up when you see wrong can save lives. Above all, the Mark Hanlon case shows that persistence, by family, by investigators, and by science, is always the path to justice, even if it takes nearly 30 years. Thank you for following this haunting cold case story. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other journeys to uncover the truth. See you in the next video, where we continue to explore mysteries that seem buried forever.